us on our live stream and on Shaw 4. I'd like to call the regular meeting of Council to order. The first item is introduction of late items. Mr. Jackson.
Thank you, Worship. The first is an addition with Mr. Robert Fuller being a delegation for item 8A, the 2015-19 financial plan. The next one is item 8C, and it's 440 Selby Street, DP 852, and there are supplemental drawings, and they are on Council's table in front of them. The next is item 8N, unresolved building deficiencies, and it's the removal of 204 Garner Crescent. The last three items are under 9C, the property maintenance bylaw. There are three properties to be removed from the agenda. The first, 445 Hillcrest Ave. The second, 755 Albert Street. And the last, 488 Sterling Avenue. Thank you, Worship.
Thank you very much. Can I have a motion for the adoption of the agenda as amended? Seconder? Seconded? All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thank you. Can I have a motion for the adoption of the minutes for March 5th, March 16th, and April 2nd? So moved. Second? Second, thank you. Discussion? Seeing none. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Yes, Mr. Swaby.
The audio?
To our technical people, we're getting a message that there's no sound. At home, I would suppose. Thank you. So the next item is with great pleasure. This is the 2015 Mayor's Poetry City Challenge, a celebration of poetry, writing, and publishing. The City of Calgary Mayor Naheed Nenshi has challenged his fellow mayors across Canada to have a local poet read a poem at the start of the council meeting to celebrate Canada's National Poetry Month. The purpose of National Poetry Month is to celebrate poetry, writing, small presses, and the contribution of poets and all writers to the cultural life and vitality in our communities. The City of Nanaimo has proclaimed April 21st as the National Poetry Day and April 2015 as National Poetry Month. To celebrate this, I would like to introduce Ms. Naomi Beth Wakem, Nanaimo's inaugural Poet Laureate, to help us to respond to Mayor Nenshi's challenge. She, along with David Fraser and Ursula Vary, will open this evening's meeting with a poem. Please come down.
Your Worship and Councillors, last year I read for 5 minutes on my own, and this year I'd like to do things a little differently. I know you like variety. I want to introduce two poets vital to Nanaimo's poetic life. They'll both read briefly, and then I'll finish up with a couple of small poems of my own, so it shouldn't be too painful for you. Firstly, David Fraser, whose efforts with his team at Wordstorm, a monthly Nanaimo poetry cafe, along with the anthologies he publishes, has drawn together so many Nanaimo poets and brought to Nanaimo so many well-established poets from away. He is lead man on the team preparing the Cascadia Poetry Festival #3, which will bring hundreds of poets and would-be poets to Nanaimo on April the 30th to May the 2nd. In Naomi and Nanaimo, you all have a gift copy in front of you. My first annual report. Someone said it was the most amusing annual report they'd read. I do hope you read it. You'll find Chris Barfoot's given you a bookmark which has all the details of the Cascadia Festival. It's really a big deal, and we do hope you will make it to at least one event. So here comes David first. Thank you, David.
Thank you. Thank you, Your Worship. I am going to read one very short poem. Naomi has taught me that in her practice, if I have more time, I can write a shorter poem. So here's a shorter poem. It's called Beginnings. In the moment before we start, whispers, tiny paw prints on snow, leaves scuttling across the tiles, nervous drips falling from the roof. And I'd like to just do a short spoken word poem as well. I'm not in the habit of giving advice, but just looking at you all out here, I would give my poem for all the young men in the audience of any age who from time to time they might find themselves in a relationship. And believe me, I've made this mistake before. If you find yourself driving down a highway on a hot, dry summer afternoon and your partner says, "There's a fruit stand," don't nod and keep on driving. Don't say, yeah, and keep on driving. Don't treat the comment as if it were an observation, such as, "Oh, look at that eagle flying overhead." Or, "Aren't those lambs in the field kind of cute?" The clouds on the horizon look ominous. Just don't. Pull over. Be happy. Buy some peaches.
And further, take note, when she says everything's fine, it's not fine.
Thanks, David. Now I'd like to present Ursula Vieira. She's the publisher of Leaf Press. It's a small press, but it's presented so many area poets to the public. Ursula's also on the Cascadia Poetry Festival 3 team, and I'd like her to read for the moment. Thanks, Ursula.
Thank you. Your Worship, I'm pushing this season on this poem, but after such a sunny day, I couldn't resist. Jessica and the Luminescent Sea. At moonrise, the world holds its breath. Jessica stands at the edge of the sea. She steps into the water. She does not ask for my hand. Inch by inch, her legs disappear. Her body melts until her face drifts white over the glistening dark. Tonight, I'll believe anything she says. Somewhere an orca dances with her mate. They drink the sea like sparkling wine. Stars fizz across their tongues, trail from their lips, a spiral pirouette. My daughter calls the sparks to gather in her palm. Thank you.
Thank you, Ursula. Now I'm going to tell you what a poem can do. A poem is a strange thing. It's not prose describing an event, commenting philosophically on the state of the world, or telling of love or the lack thereof. And yet a poem can do all those things and more. For it can condense matter, distill the essence, purify the messy, congeal the scattered. Each word of a poem can carry the weight of the universe within it, and one small verse can bring a new world out of a black hole or tip the present one over the event horizon, or tell of an early snowdrop, its petals marked with green. I'd like to finish with a poem about the Mayor's Challenge itself. This poem jumped the gun by finding itself on the Mayor's Challenge website before I presented it to you. Please forgive me. This poem's called The Mayor's Challenge. I picture the mayors and councillors all across Canada sitting in bewilderment, not having had poetry read to them since high school days. As poets rant politically or spiritually, or praising the domestic hearth or vilifying it, the TV camera slowly passes across the mayor and councillors' faces, and some look bored or have their eyes closed, thinking about the other items on the night's agenda. But then you'll see the odd mayor or councillor startled to full attention by some devastating or appealing line of verse. Their eyes may well be filling up with tears that they hastily cover up by blowing their noses loudly. But one can't deny it. It's there for all to see. The moment when the power of poetry meets a receptive ear. At such a moment, all is in full flow, and the Mayor's Challenge has been met. Thank you all so much.
Thank you.
Thank you.
I just wanted to say that nobody quite knew what the role of a poet laureate was and what it meant to a community. And people around the community from north to south to Gabriola and beyond have been absolutely tickled pink with the fact that their poet laureate seems to be everywhere. There she is. And I know that Mayor Nenshi appreciates the work that you do, as well as all the other poet laureates across Canada. But I just want to let him know right here, right now, that we have the finest poet laureate in all of the land. Thank you. Next item is also a great pleasure that I wish to make an award presentation to Mr. James Scantland of the Nanaimo Ebb Tides Masters Swim Club. As he is a national champion after winning 4 gold medals at the Canadian Masters Swimming Championship in Windsor, Ontario, May 16 and 17, 2014. Mr. Scantland won gold in the following events: 200-meter individual medley, 100-meter individual medley, 200-meter backstroke, 50-meter backstroke. Can you believe that? All of those. Congratulations to Mr. James Scantland. Thank you for bringing recognition to our city through your achievements. Please. Each one of these has a plaque, or pardon me, something that we can present to you. So that's the first one. Now I'm not sure if these are all going to be in the same order, but look at this. Oh. Number 1. Thank you. Number 2. Number 3. Oh my. And number 4. Thank you. Mr. Scanlon, thank you very much. Congratulations. Congratulations. We've got a real tight schedule, but I think they'll let you have a minute.
I'd like to thank you, Mayor, for your election as our new mayor, and also to the incumbents and to the new council members that were elected. We went to the huge meeting that you had here prior to the election, and you all worked hard to get here, and I think you're doing a wonderful job. One last comment. Oh, okay, dear. Go ahead.
Excuse me,
This week-
does that film have camera, or does that camera have film in it?
Yes.
Oh my.
It does. I have a digital as well. The Nanaimo Ebb Tides, which I'm a member of, is hosting the BC Masters Swim Championships right here in Nanaimo, and we thank you for promoting swimming at Nanaimo Aquatic Center. It's Friday night, all day Saturday and Sunday. So
This weekend.
this weekend, yes.
Everybody, bring out your phones right now. Put it in your phones as we speak. Don't tell me you don't have phones. I know you have phones. Thank you very much. This weekend. Congratulations again. All right, the next item. Mr. Stephen Ricketts, Manager of Construction, and Mr. Philip Cooper, Communications Manager, regarding a new construction app available to residents. Mr. Cooper.
Thank you, Your Worship. So this evening, we'd like to bring to your attention, and the residents of Nanaimo in particular, a new application or online tool that's been developed specifically to help residents and commuters in general understand where some of the city's construction projects are taking place. Construction projects, as you know, can often be a source of high irritation. People learn about things despite some of the methods that have been used by the city to inform them or keep them abreast of what's taking place. But there's often a gap in information. So what we've done is put together an online resource that allows people to check in and take note of some of the different projects that are underway that may have an impact on perhaps their channel of activity in terms of getting to work, their home, their place of employment, and generally keep people informed as a whole. This initiative supports some of the other online tools that have been developed, such as What's Building in Our Neighborhood and the Crime Map, which was launched last year. So it's a way of, again, keeping people informed and helping them out in terms of getting information. It does support the city's communication plan, and it's a way, again, to share information, which is critically important in today's environment of everyone wanting information as soon as they can get it. So Steve is now going to do a quick demo on how it works, and then we'll take any questions.
Certainly.
Okay, so you can get this. This is just on the City of Nanaimo website, and it's under Engineering Public Works. And this is what you will pull up when you open up the site. And so what it is we're taking the projects that are currently ready for construction, or if they're planned for construction. And so there's a couple ways. It's a very graphic interface. So you could go and say, geez, I live somewhere in here, and you can click on it. And you'll see it flashes over here and picks up the project. And then you can go, I really want to see that a little closer, so you can click and show on the map, and it brings it into a close-up. Now, part of what we're wanting to do with this app is to communicate more project information. It's currently information we give out mostly to the local residents, but there certainly is a need to get that out to the general public as well. So if I click on the details, and I'll use this as an example, we now get some more information about the project. It'll give you a bit of a description of what we're doing. It will give you sort of some general considerations, when we're going to be working, the type of disruptions, that sort of thing. Start, stop date, our budget estimate. And then we can add information to this. So we've added a couple things to notice to residents, which is something we give, the residents. So if you're in the area, you've lost your notice, you want to phone somebody that's sitting here. And something we've done for this project, because it is in the hospital area, it's a little bit slow, but it basically allows us, because we're in the hospital area and we know we're really impacting emergency services. And so what we're trying to do weekly for this particular one is we're showing the work zones, because we're communicating this already to emergency services. And so it'll allow people, this project will go till likely November, to know where the activity is. So it gives a certain amount of planning. And really, it's really that simple. We're able to put pictures on, so we can show pictures of the construction. And again, the map. So in essence, that's really the app. And if I can run it, I think pretty much anybody could run it.
Good. Thank you. Questions? Councillor Kipp.
Yeah, thank you. Through to Mr. Ricketts. How many hits do we get on the site for this type of stuff? Do we have
This just went live on Friday.
oh, so
Yeah, so we did soft rollout on Friday, and we're presenting it to council today. And then we'll see where it goes from here.
if I can follow up, this is similar to What's Building in My Neighborhood. It's the same software,
Yeah.
same application, just rolled out for construction projects.
Similar in approach. We did think about calling it why am I late to work today? But yeah, it's a similar application, but it pulls from a different database, and
It's called What's Digging on My Street?
it can be called that too. Right now, it's just current construction map, but yeah.
Thank you.
Councillor Hong.
Thank you, Your Worship. Question to staff. Is this just what we as the city are building, or is there actually like private people that are doing subdivision development that require road work as well and that they're doing, or is this just projects that the city is doing?
This will be just city capital projects. So for the developments, we have What's Building in My Neighborhood,
Yeah.
which will show all the subdivisions and the PLAs and those sorts of things. We're currently not capturing any of the private utility work. So hydro, tel, we're not capturing any of that. And also our maintenance work. If our crews are out doing patching or that sort of thing, that won't show up on this map. It's just basically the bigger projects that are impacting construction, or impacting traffic, excuse me.
Thank you.
Councillor Fuller.
I'll attest that anybody can do it. I just did as he was talking. I went on the website and checked it out. It's actually pretty cool. Give it a shot. Definitely think of changing the name, but only to Why Am I Late? The acronym is WHALE. So anyway, it's great. Thanks.
Thank you very much. Seeing no other questions, thank you very much. Motion to receive the delegation. No, okay, no. Next one is Superintendent Mark Fisher, Officer in Charge, RCMP, Nanaimo Detachment, regarding the 2015-16 Annual Policing Policies, and there is a motion subsequent to the presentation. Welcome.
Thank you. Okay, we'll see how technologically adept I am. Oh, look at that. Must be a good tool because it's not the operator. Good evening, Your Worship, members of council. I'm here tonight to talk briefly with you in regards to our annual priorities for policing for the city of Nanaimo. It's a process we come forward each year on. And given that there are some new members of council, I thought I'd take a few minutes not only to explain the priorities or how we develop them, but also some of the initiatives that we're doing in regards to each of the priorities. We currently have a strategic plan that the municipality was involved in helping us develop, as were other community partners, for 2013 to 2017. Now, each year we evaluate the priorities associated with that plan, and last year we kept the same set of priorities that we had in the initial plan, and for this year that would be my recommendation as well. Now, they're an overarching set of priorities in regards to policing, and then we as a police department go away and develop specific initiatives to try and address each of those plans. So when I go through the priorities, I'll talk a bit briefly about some of the initiatives that are related to each of them. We are required by the RCMP to consult with councils and our partners. So I do a similar consultation with Lanceville as well as the two First Nations that we police in regards to priorities for those communities for each of the policing years as well. As well, we require an adoption by council of the policing priorities, which is what His Worship referred to earlier. First area of priority is crime reduction, which encompasses the areas that you see there. Social disorder management is in regards to street disorder and some of the social issues we deal with in the community. And when I talk about that, I talk about things like our support of the homeless strategy for the municipality and our work that our bike squad and some of our other officers do in regards to that. Some of the work we do with neighborhoods around crime prevention through social development and advice we will give to developers and other people in neighborhoods, apartment owners. We also have officers involved with the sex trade cohort, so working a lot with sex trade workers, with neighborhoods in regards to the impact that that can have on their neighborhoods, and also the safety of people that are involved in that. And we base a lot of that work on best practices from Vancouver. Our liaison with the Bike Squad and the Downtown Business Association, some of the work we do in the downtown core. Graffiti Task Force falls under this, as well as a lot of the work we do in the mental health sector of the community. So both with community agencies as well as Island Health, and work on those issues in the downtown core. So that encompasses some of the work we do around social disorder in the community. Prolific offender management is something that's been in place for about 5 years here. And that focuses on the offenders that are causing the most harm in our community, the highest volume of calls. And we have an officer that's dedicated to managing that, to ensuring that our officers are aware of when high priority offenders come out of custody and what they're doing in the community, to monitor that, and also direct some of our resources to policing in regards to that work. We work closely with BC Corrections in that area, and this year, for the first time, we've made arrangements where we actually have a corrections officer coming into the office 1 day a week, who actually sits with our officers and discusses common clients and what's going well. Often corrections will have input into offenders that are actually doing quite well in the conditions they're on. So it's important as well that we share that information on top of the information in regards to those that are not doing so well. Violence in relationships, you'll see there, we have a coordinated partnership with Haven House Society. We work quite closely with them. We have one officer dedicated full-time to monitoring high-risk domestic violence cases. And this year, towards the end of the fall, Haven House received some provincial funding to be one of 4, I think it is, pilots in the province. So we're an actual pilot site. And we now have our officer working out of Haven House for a couple of days a week, which is a big advancement instead of just working out of the detachment. So working much closer with the society and with victims in those high-risk files. Drug enforcement is a continuing issue in the community. We hope to have a new sergeant for that unit. They'll be named later this week. A lot of work in the past year on the fentanyl issue as well. That has been a big issue not only in our community but across the province. Fentanyl deaths and doing both enforcement on the fentanyl front but as well as some education with people that are involved in that so that they understand the risks associated to fentanyl use and trying to prevent deaths and harm in the community. Work closely with Island Health in that regard as well. I was just at a meeting on Friday in regards to that. The liquor control strategy focuses for the most part on the downtown core and the bars there, our Bar Watch program. As well, we do some work with city departments, with parks, and with some of the bylaws in regards to liquor control and sometimes for planning for major events. Some of the large summer events we have where there are special occasion licenses, we'll often consult with other city departments or community agencies and partners to ensure that we have a safe policing plan for those events and community celebrations. Next priority is youth. We attend regularly youth at risk meetings with the school district, with our school liaison officers to discuss supports that we can provide for youth at risk in the community. As well, this past year, for the first time, we started a Kids for Kids program at Fairview Elementary dealing with a very high-risk group of children in the community. And what we did is we worked with VIU and brought in a group of social work students, practicum students. So we did after-school programming both from a recreational perspective. We had food for the kids and then had a police officer involved, usually a couple police officers there, to do positive activities with the kids after school, and usually did it from about 3:30 to 5. And I was able to attend that, and you could see the impact and the trust that was being built there, not only between our officers and the kids, but the practicum students as well. And you would see them go off on little sidebar discussions from time to time, and you could really tell that is one of those programs that I believe strongly will have a lasting impact on some of these youth's lives. As well, we have a program with VIU where we bring, and here we're talking about some of the older youth, I guess. We provide them practicum experiences within the office, so some of them will come and work with our IDENT officers. We have one that worked with our crime analysts this past year, as well as some ride-alongs to expose youth to policing and some of the issues we deal with in the community. We also have a full-time school liaison program with 6 officers in the schools that are dedicated to schools and do that on a full-time basis and work with at-risk youth in the community. Traffic, in my mind, we've got one of the best traffic units in the province, and their stats show what the impact they have on driving down both impaired driving accidents and fatalities in the community. For the size of the community, we have very few fatalities, and I think a lot of that speaks to the work that they do in that area. They also do work with youth on what's called the PARTY program, which talks about some of the hazards of drug use and drinking and driving, and they work closely with Island Health on that program. Boat marine patrols also fall under this. This is predominantly, obviously, a summer initiative that we do. We get significant funding from the province to help support this program as far as the patrols we do in the harbor, and then we also take the boat out onto some of the lakes within the city. So Long Lake, and we also do some work in Brannan Lake on impaired driving and boater safety. Some of the trends, I know I spoke to you a few months ago about crime stats and trends we're seeing in the community. Some of this obviously relates back to priorities. We are seeing a bit more pressure from groups in the Lower Mainland coming over to Nanaimo and some of their involvement both on the street and in some of the drug trade. I know the bars are seeing some of the impact of that. Tech crime, we're seeing an increased volume in tech crime. and the demands on our officers to get more educated in the area of tech crime and resources to be able to respond to that, and as well an increasing volume of calls. One thing we're doing to try to address some of that, I spoke to my officers about it earlier this week, is we're going to take 2 of our school liaison officers and move them just during the summer months over to work specifically on property crime and prolific offenders to try to address some of our increasing calls for service. So they will come out for the months of July and August and work specifically with our officers in charge of prolific offenders. Then in the fall, from the months of October to April, we'll have 2 members of the bike squad come out and do the same thing to try to drive down some of that those extra 2,800 calls we had last year and hopefully have an impact on some of these repeat offenders. So this slide just shows an encapsulation of the priorities that I've spoken about. And as I said, once they are approved by council, then we go away and work on initiatives that reflect those priorities and impact them. So this is the wording of the resolution that we'd recommend, but prior to that, I'll take any questions that any.
Thank you. Councillor Thorpe.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you, if I may, to Superintendent Fisher, thank you for your presentation, and thank you to the work of yourself and your members in keeping our community safe. We appreciate your efforts, of course. A couple of comments, if I may. First, as somebody who worked in the educational system for many years, I'm well aware of the importance of the school liaison officers, and I really appreciate what your focus is there on being proactive and building some relationships and building trust, and I think that program really will pay dividends down the road. My other comment or question to you is with regard to your top priority in crime prevention, and you mentioned the bike squad. Mm-hmm. And I think some people maybe wrongly see that as sort of a frill, but actually, from what I gather, they play a very important role in helping reduce crime and social disorder. Could you just comment on that a little further?
Sure. The bike officers are our front line in the community, in my view. I mean, they're very much engaged with our community groups, and there's a lot of continuity there in regards to the relationships they've built on many fronts, on the Bar Watch front, on many of the street disorder issues and mental health issues. And it's important that we keep those relationships in the community because with the turnover of officers we have, these people have relationships built on trust. And they've come a long ways in turning around a lot of the disorder issues that used to exist in the downtown core and other parts of the community. So that knowledge and those relationships help feed back information to the rest of our officers to understand some of the history there, but also where we can have impact and which agencies they should be engaging in. So they do a lot more than ride around on bikes. And I think anybody that's been in the community any length of time understands that. They provide a lot of value, and they do really what I think a bike squad should do. There's a balance at all times. Obviously, it's not all prevention. They do a significant part of enforcement as well. Bar Watch just being one example of that. When we have our summer festivals there, a lot of the frontline response to that as well. So they do play a key role, and they fluctuate a bit. Sometimes we change what we want them doing from month to month, depending on what the crime issues are. And it's often their primary responsibility to deal with some of the homeless issues and the street disorder issues, and then draw in our uniform officers to work with them on that. So it's not solely their responsibility, obviously.
Very good. Thank you very much.
Councillor Brennan.
Thank you, Your Worship. The first thing I want to do is thank you for the work that you do in the community and know that we appreciate it. And in particular, I have a special interest in the sex trade workers and ensuring their safety as well as ensuring that the concerns of the neighborhood are addressed and making that an easier relationship. So thank you. I know that there's good work going on there. I'm interested in the liquor control strategy because it has been possibly 10 years, I think, since council was involved in that strategy and developing it and communicating with the, how many? No, I haven't been on council that long, and I chaired the committee. No, it was, well, that was one, okay, but when we went to the community of the retail outlets and the bars, that was later. It wasn't 2000. Okay. Yeah, thank you. So what I have not been briefed on the new strategy, how it's developing, and the kinds of communications that have been had with the bar owners and other retail liquor outlets. So I'd be really interested in having something like that, have a sit-down session with council to tell us what's going on, how it's working, and because I think one of the things you said was that we would adopt this evening, and then you would start to work on how that would develop out. So I'd really like to see us be involved a little bit in that liquor control strategy, seeing as it was something that I was actively involved in and chaired that committee. So.
No, for sure. If council's interested, that can obviously be one of the
I don't know if
initiatives that feeds
council
into
is.
the
I am
priority and come
anyway,
back.
but I'm sure we all are. So thank you.
Our officers meet regularly with the Bar Watch program,
Yeah.
as well as merchants outside the program.
Yes.
And no, I'd be happy to bring them in and do an update.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Fuller.
Quick question. And then I'll, if you'll allow me, I'll make some statements. My stepson's RCMP, so yeah, would I be in a conflict of interest by voting on this?
It's difficult in the moment, but I would suggest not, because this is applicable to everyone, not just yourself.
Yeah. Well, and it's also applicable in my other job with Nanaimo Youth Services, as well as with my job as the chair of the 710 Club Society. I've had the opportunity to work with the bike squad, with school liaison, and through the 710 Club, I'm also a member of the sex trade cohort. And, these are all phenomenal programs that do a huge amount of good. And when you say relationships built on trust, that is definitely what's happening, and it happens with the youth as well as with the homeless and as well as other people in the community. I think you're doing a fantastic job.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Hong.
Thank you, Your Worship. Thank you, Superintendent Fisher, for that presentation. Just a couple of comments and question here. Being a part of the Bar Watch group, we do value the participation and the efforts that we get from the RCMP. It's definitely has made a huge change in the downtown and in the nightlife and the entertainment in our area. So very pleased with that. Like I said, I was part of the initial startup of the Bar Watch program roughly about 7 years ago. So I'm pleased to say that we've actually added a few more bars and so forth, and we've added a couple other bars in the technology that we're using for scanning IDs. So it's a huge improvement. But the question I have is, you say that you get funding from the government with regards to waterfront and marine safety with that aspect. How come we're not getting any money from the liquor control licensing strategy through the liquor inspectors to help offset some of our costs and the manpower that we put to that? Is that something, who do we discuss?
They view that, my understanding, they would view that strictly as a municipal responsibility. The reason we get extra money for some of the waterfront work that we do, or the water patrols that we do, is they do consider portions, obviously, of the water area as provincial area. So we use that argument to advance that, saying, yes, a lot of the festivals and the events that are happening are city events that involve the water, but we also have a provincial component to that, and think that it's really important that we fund that with seasonal policing money. So periodically they will come out with a seasonal policing budget provincially and offer it up, and we have to talk about provincial events that have impact on policing resources. And now many of these are events that we're going to be stuck policing regardless of who pays the bill. So we've got to look for those opportunities to go out there and say, well, here, this one has a provincial component, it's meaningful, and we have an impact with our policing presence in it. And the water is a natural fit in regards to that one. In regards to your question about the actual liquor and money from the liquor branch in regards to liquor strategy, I'm quite confident they would come back to us and say, because it's located within a municipality, it falls under municipal jurisdiction as a municipal responsibility.
A follow-up on that? The RCMP write liquor infraction tickets. So theoretically, we're doing the jobs of liquor inspectors as an RCMP officer that the city pay for. So if we're doing their job, why aren't we getting paid to do it for them?
Well, it falls into our job too. I mean, that's part of our job is to enforce the Liquor Act as well. So.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Yoakum.
Thank you, Worship. First of all, Superintendent Fisher, I'd like to acknowledge your time in the city. You've been a great asset to the city under your leadership. It's really great to see where we're going in the RCMP component. The question I would have, actually more accolade / question would be, it's nice, unfortunately there has to be a position, I don't say it's nice, but it's fortunate there's a position on domestic violence. Domestic violence is prevalent in all parts of our corners of our city, under all demographics, and it sort of goes under the radar. And with my line of work, as you're familiar with, it's far too rampant, and I'm pleased you have a position to deal with domestic violence. And just looking forward to our committee work. Is there where we can expand the program where we can actually start making a real difference? You're making a difference, but enhance our difference in that line of work around DV. Thank you.
I think this is a start. This coordinated group, and the fact that the province has recognized that money should come to Nanaimo for that purpose is one of the pilot sites in the province. I think that's an important step forward. I hope that will lead to more provincial involvement in regards to support of that program. You know, right now we have Haven House obviously committed, ourselves committed, and I think there's a role for the Ministry of Children and Families to play there. And they're involved in some of the discussions, but obviously they don't have a full-time position dedicated to it at this point in time. They've got their own funding pressures. But I think there would be opportunities there for hopefully for further provincial involvement at some point. And
absolutely. Go forward and work together. Thank you. Thank you.
Councillor Brennan.
Thank you. This may put you in a tight spot, and feel free to say I can't comment on that, but you asked for additional officers in this year. Can you give me an idea of how the decision not to fund those positions, how that may have impacted this strategy? I think that's what we're calling it, the annual policing priority. Sorry.
I view it the same as any other municipal department or department of any organization, in that you're given a budget and you work within that budget. So I have a budget, and I've had to make certain resourcing or operational decisions, is maybe a better way to frame it. And one of those operational decisions is, as I said earlier, the fact that I will redeploy a couple school liaison officers for those 2 months and some bike officers in the fall to try to address some of that spike in crime that we've had. And I'll evaluate it at the end of that and see what impact it had. And then I'll make further decisions on that. But from time to time, you have to make decisions like that. The priorities remain the same. I think we still need to focus on those areas. But obviously, you can't do everything, and you'll have to make certain adjustments as you go, and that's the adjustment I'm looking at right now.
Well, thank you. I'm hoping that when you give your quarterly reports, you could maybe update us on how that has impacted your ability.
Yeah, I will for sure. I'll update on the call volume as well as the changes in crime.
Thank you. I see no further speakers, but I'd like to add something. In last term, I was not able to, for whatever reason, do a ride-along. I would love to do that. Too often we find ourselves just looking over at numbers and pages and in budgets and whatnot, and we never really get a sense as to what the real work is all about and some of the challenges that you have. So I would love to arrange something, and I would encourage everyone on council to do the same. In addition to which, I would like to see, based on my experience, you know, what it looks like down on the harbour with your water patrol as well. Not only that, but it's going to be interesting to see what the front seat of a car looks like.
I was going to say, I'm not around.
It's a little louder with the radio, it's a little cleaner in the back, and you get a little more legroom. But no, yeah, that offer is open at any time to any member of council.
Thank you very much. There is a motion that goes along with this presentation. Do I have a...
Move the motion.
Councillor Kipp moves the motion. Councillor Yoakum seconding. All those in favour? Opposed? Carried. Thank you very much. Yes.
Point of information, the Nelson Welch report was 2002. And then the liquor strategy after that.
The liquor strategy, and then there was the liquor retail.
Resale strategy.
Retail.
Retail. It's
Yeah,
almost
so
time to redo those.
I think it's time to look at them, for sure.
Thank you. Next item. Corporate Services. 2015-2019 Financial Plan and 2015 Property Tax Rates Bylaw, to be introduced by Mr. Brian Clements, Director of Finance. Please, Mr. Clements.
Thank you, Your Worship. I do not have a presentation tonight. I think we've probably made enough presentations to Council on the budget this year. Council has spent several meetings discussing the budget, including a full-day session on March 30th, where they went through a fair amount of detail on projects. The bylaws on tonight's agenda have been prepared using Council's direction that came out of the meetings that have happened previously. The budget and the bylaws tonight represent a 0% increase on existing services, plus a 1% increase to the reserve for future asset management projects. This is the lowest tax increase for the city of Nanaimo in more than 10 years. As the report says, these bylaws must be adopted by May the 15th. There is no leeway. We cannot, if we do not adopt them by May 15th, there will be no tax rates and we won't be able to collect taxes. So we must adopt these bylaws. And just for Council's information, there is only one more scheduled Council meeting before the deadline on May the 4th. So unless we have special meetings, Council must give 3 readings tonight to a budget bylaw to meet that schedule. And if that wasn't enough, I should remind Council that budgeting is a year-round activity, and we've already started working on the 2016 to 2020 financial plan at the staff level, and we're planning on bringing forward a report to Council in May on the 2016 financial plan process. So that's all I have, Your Worship.
Thank you. And it's now requested that anyone, that Council will hear anyone wishing to speak with respect to the 2015-2019 financial plan. And there is one delegation registered, Mr. Robert Fuller. Please come down.
Robert Fuller, 3350 Hammond Bay Road. Another year has passed, and once again we are in the position of having to meet a deadline to pass a financial plan which yields yet further tax increases, in addition to yet further increases to our city services and fees for the years to come. There is little wonder in this day and age that many Canadians find themselves working well into the year before we actually get to see any fiscal returns that can go into our own pockets. While little of what I say will lead to any amount of relief for our city taxpayers this year, you all have 3.5 more years in that hopefully the goals of fiscal responsibility and accountability for our taxpayers' hard-earned dollars will take root. During the past 2 years, you have met in the SARC boardroom, picking apart line item after line item, some councillors worried about service cuts, others not even able to attend because of work commitments. Accountability for some institutions and entities has seemingly escaped through the safety net, rather inexcusable when most all of us practice these skills in our own home lives. There are 3 such instances where accountability for money spent could reap huge rewards, not only for the tax-paying citizens of Nanaimo, but for our city itself. The first is our much ballyhooed convention center, in which each year we dump over $3 million into an underperforming and what some would consider empty institutional space, where I will hazard that our city is its own best customer. Where are the performance parameters? Why has there been so little interest in looking into this major hit to our pockets? Or is there hopes that the core review will take care of this financial fiasco? Secondly, is the Nanaimo Economic Development Corporation, which recently ran up a $162,000 deficit. I can remember going to a board meeting years ago where there was talk of setting parameters to judge the performance of this entity, but have heard nothing since then. Does this board even exist? Where is the fiscal responsibility and where are the parameters to ensure the fiscal responsibility? If this cost overrun was paid for out of reserves, why was it not recovered for you and I? What happens if NEDC runs another deficit and does not have the reserves to cover it. Does that come out of our pockets too? My last submission has to do with the funding of grants. During the past few years, and I'm sure that this has been going on for many more, there seems to be the actions on some grant applicants to not only double, but in some case even triple dip from various government sources. While I'm sure that it behooves their bottom line to do this, is it fair? I've only got so many pockets. Surely I can have one for myself and my family. I've taken part in, and I'm sure many of you yourselves have, fundraising events to ensure that my children go on field trips, etc. Maybe it's time to make fundraising a non-negotiable qualification to grant giving. You will notice that not once in my submission have I asked for or even inferred that we should close, reduce, or perform any service cuts at all. In fact, if simple accountability and fiscal responsibility was practiced in these and other instances, I would fathom that our services and the facilities' capability of providing what they are meant to do would be greatly enhanced. Thank you.
Any questions for the delegation, Councillor Kipp? No. No, seeing none, thank you. Motion to receive the delegation?
So moved.
Thank you. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Is there anyone else that wishes to speak to the 2015-2019 financial plan? Seeing none, there is a motion that Council receive from information the report pertaining to the financial plan bylaw, listed on page 62 to 65. Can I have a mover, please? Thank you. Seconder? Thank you. Discussion. Councillor Kipp? No? Okay, sorry. Councillor Bestwick.
Thank you. Mr. Clemens, there's dates in our report identifying the meetings that we've had to arrive at the place where we are today. And I realize that we have zero time left in which to satisfy our requirements to the province. I have a question in so much as have we, and this is a very delicate and sensitive question because it's something that we didn't do in open. And so have we made the necessary adjustments to 2016 and beyond for equipment and staff increases from 2016 and further?
If I understand what you're referring to, that will be done when we do the 2016 bylaw. We have not changed this version of the bylaw since we started the process for the year 2016.
But is this not the 2015 to 2019 bylaw that we're approving?
That's correct. But if we're not making an expenditure until 2016, we have until 2016 to get that in. We can make amendments once council's ready to do that.
Yet, then may I just then ask procedurally why it was necessary for us to have to make that decision in 2015 if we're not going to make any adjustments to our 2015 to 2019 financial plan? And the amounts, if the amounts weren't significant, I wouldn't be raising this topic.
Your Worship, with your indulgence, if it's referring to the security issues, that hasn't been included yet because that would come forward as part of the 2016 budget. And I would also comment that when we bring forward the report where we're going with the budget for 2016, because of Council's motion not to increase any service levels, we'll be looking to remove items from the budget for 2016 that would be an increased service level until Council actually completes the core review. So we'll be bringing forward that. It becomes a bit tricky on how we do the budget process next year, given that we're going to be full steam with a core review for the next 2 years.
We'll be, so off topic slightly, if I may, so we'll be full steam with the core search review for 2 years? in your estimate?
Your Worship, I provided a timeline, I believe, to council, and I think we're actually still falling behind on it, and it will be probably 2 years by the time we implement anything. So it becomes difficult to have decisions about budgets when we, of course, start the budget process for 2016. We start this month, if not even sooner. So you have to catch up once council makes decisions on the core review, then you can try and fit it into the next budget cycle.
Thank you. And just my last question / comment. It's been recognized by Mr. Clemens that it would be appropriate for us to deal with the next year's budget in the last quarter, and I recognize that we'll get started on the process soon, after we approve this one, for 2016. I would just ask that, will we be making every effort, regardless of the fact that we are undertaking a core services review, to work towards a 2016 and 2017 budget in the previous year versus in the year that we're budgeting for?
So Your Worship, I can respond to that. The report that I plan on bringing forward to Council in May will outline the target dates for presenting the budget to Council, which will occur in 2015.
But Your Worship, also try this as well, because as we went through the budget this year, and as Council made some decisions and staff made some decisions, it just pushed out those projects and those budget items to future years. So there's this increase in the budget in years to come until Council either decides to do them and include them in the budget, or to take them right out of the budget, which in most cases are asset management issues which become difficult to take out. And this is why we're advocating always a balanced approach to try and keep the tax rate at something that's reasonable, because we don't believe there's things in the current budget under the current service levels that you can take out without reducing service levels. And that'll be a good discussion during the core review, of course, to find out if in fact Council agrees with that.
Thank you. I would concur. I'm extremely interested in the process to follow and in balance and offsets. I could not agree more that balance and offsets are critical if we wish to maintain a sustainable budget over time. Thank you.
Councillor Kipp.
Thank you. Just a couple of questions. On page 68 is our statement of revenue and objectives and policies. Can you remind me again how we select the similar communities for comparables and what communities we compare with?
Oh, I didn't bring the list of communities, but it's 12 communities closest to Nanaimo in population. 6 larger and 6 lower are the ones that I've typically used for comparison.
Okay, thank you. And with distribution of property taxes from 2009 to 2013, we did the light and major industry tax rates and reduced them. How do we determine if those were working? And is there a benchmark in our balanced scorecard that talks about that?
Not precisely, Your Worship. I think that's a really good question, and it's probably a good subject for Council to have some kind of seminar session on within Council, because I really think it's up to Council to decide whether it's working or not. I don't know that there's a number that will tell you whether it is or isn't. I think you'll get different answers depending on who your stakeholders are. But I think that's a really good discussion for Council, particularly if it's maybe done over the summer when you've got more time to give it some thought.
And I guess that backs up a follow-up question: is the revitalization tax, is that working too? And I guess we would know by hotels and different things that have applied, but that's my concern. Is it working? Is it attracting? Is it revitalizing? And I guess I look for sort of objectives. 2015, we've got to get going on the service review so we can implement it in 2016, some of the implementation. And our DCC list and cost updates, when will that, we think we'll have a handle on that with the reduction of Lindley Valley and some of those costs?
So Your Worship, that project is ongoing right now. We're working on a new list of projects throughout the city. The Engineering and Public Works Department is working on identifying the projects and costing them, and I think that will probably be somewhat concurrent with the budget process. I would expect to have a report to Council, well, it won't be me, but somebody will have a report to Council this fall.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Councillor Yocum.
Thank you, Your Worship. Mr. Clemens, I know we've had this conversation numerous times, or with myself, and sometimes I get on with many questions. So tonight's motion is a bylaw, or to pass a bylaw basically for the provincial government. That's a need by them.
So the way that local government works is that in order to collect taxes, we have to have two things. We need to have a budget bylaw, that's the financial plan bylaw.
Yeah.
And according to the community charter, that must be a 5-year plan. And we must adopt that by May 15th each year. And it must be adopted before you adopt a property tax rates bylaw. So then the property tax rates bylaw is staff taking the numbers that are in the budget and the numbers provided the BC Assessment Authority and coming up with a calculation of what rate would have to be charged to each class of property in order to collect enough property taxes to meet the objectives within the budget. So like any other bylaw process, we have to have 3 readings on one evening and then a final adoption on a separate agenda.
Okay, Mr. Worship, just to conclude. Okay, thank you for making clarity for myself again. So I've always made it crystal clear from this numerous conversation on this, the 2017, which has been reduced from the beginning stages, is still a little concern to myself. So I heard you earlier state there's still space for amendments for the budget, if we're able to, et cetera, if possible. So we're permitted to make amendments if we can.
So, Your Worship, once the budget has been finally adopted, we can make amendments to it, that's correct. You can't make any amendments to it in 2015 that would require the raising of more property taxes because that ship has sailed after you pass the property tax rates bylaw. If you want to amend future years, you can do that. I would suggest that your best way to deal with that is through the core services review, to go through and evaluate the services and determine what you want to do in the future. And also through your strategic plan. That will give you the framework for you to determine whether you actually want to do all of those projects and those are the right things to do in 2017. I understand your concern about 2017, but the fortunate part about it is you've got 2 years to go through and figure out exactly what your priorities are as a council.
Okay, to wrap it up is, sorry, Council, is for my comfort, and I needed to hear that to possibly vote in favor of, because for the bylaw, et cetera, whatever our requirements, but knowing we may have space in 2017, which is a sore mark with me at this point, but thank you. Thank you, sir.
Councillor Thorpe.
Thank you, Your Worship. I will be supporting this budget, but I also have concerns, and my concerns are that I was disappointed in some of the cuts that we made to arrive at this 1% increase. I think it's extremely minimal, and I'm concerned as we look forward that we are deferring decisions such as hiring extra RCMP staff. We're delaying construction of a possible new fire hall. We are delaying reports and studies of upcoming major projects. And it just seems to me that we are sort of snowplowing costs as we move forward. And by not spending revenues to address these initiatives now, it's going to cost us more in the future should we decide to proceed with them. So I will support this budget, but I am concerned about deferring those costs. And again, maybe those are things that will be re-examined through the core review process. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Kipp.
Oh yeah, one thing I just hit trigger, thank you. Revenue on page, it is, I'm going to get a page number here. It's Schedule A of it. It doesn't want to show me the page number. Page 67. Revenue from other sources. It goes along until 2017 with 27,006, 28,7, 32,5. Then it drops to 24 and back to 25. It looked like it was going up incrementally, but then it drops considerably. Do we know why the revenues are?
I can't be 100% certain, but my suspicion that has to do with government grants, because during the next couple of years we're spending a lot of money out of grant, particularly for the water treatment plant and that sort of thing. And this just may reflect that we haven't gotten far enough into our planning process to plan which projects we're going to fund from grants in the last 2 years.
Okay, because one thing I don't like is planning in other people's money that might not ever come, and that's one of my concerns on the revenue base.
One of the implications for 2016 and 17 is the grant money that council has committed, for example, to the Port Theatre project.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Brennan.
Thank you, Your Worship. Yeah, I will support this this budget, but it certainly is reluctant support. It's lukewarm support. I think the measures that we took as a council were extreme. Right off the bat, $744,000 was taken out of this budget, and we reduced protective services. I think that that's short-sighted, and we've pushed these things off into Never Never Land. I don't think that there's been adequate consideration given to what these decisions will mean now, and I don't think adequate consideration has been given to what these decisions will mean in the future. As Councillor Thorpe said, we've delayed the fire hall one more time. This is the 5th year. We have not added to the RCMP when we know some of the challenges that are faced there. We have reduced staff training at a time when we need our staff to be up to speed on whatever we throw at them, and we have a reduced staff now. We are delaying reports, and just a number of things that we've done that I would call extreme measures and not a kind of measured response to what we're faced with. But because I know and understand that you can't have everything you want, and a budget isn't going to reflect everything that I think, I'll support this. But as I say, it is with reluctance, and I can't imagine that the core services review is going to be an easy task, because I think it will push us into even more extreme measures. And I find that lamentable.
Councillor Fuller.
Yeah, I'm going to support the bylaw. I think we did a great job on reducing it. I don't have a problem with it this year, because knowing that a core review was coming, we can deal with the rest of it in the next couple of years through the core review. It's going to be a huge challenge, I get that, but I think it's going to be a real eye-opener. So I will be supporting it.
Councillor Yoakum.
Thank you. Not to belabor this for myself, but I think hopefully in the future when we're having this conversation, I unfortunately missed that meeting that we turned into the conversation around in January, when the police conversation came up. But I hope in the future the conversation about reducing rates, etc., isn't always strictly about services. That sort of puts fear out there, a fear context somewhat. When I think we'll get creative, and I look forward to the core review of showing outline some of the numbers. A gentleman last week, I believe Mr. O'Donnell, gave a PowerPoint presentation. It seemed like we were pretty top heavy. I don't know how accurate the report was, but the gentleman did get it from our website, and it seemed like we're pretty top heavy in say some exempt staff, etc. So we got to be creative. It doesn't also have to be the front line, the people that make the city run, the people that protect us, and the people that put out fires. The people in the front line don't have to be the first when we look at cuts, etc. Maybe so. Hopefully, I'm looking forward to core review to verify the numbers that we've seen last week, Your Worship, because it seemed like we had lots of managers, etc. there compared to frontline. Thank you. I'm just saying what I read, man. I know you're rolling your eyes at me, but
You might have a difference of opinion. Councillor Hong.
Thank you, Your Worship. I, on the other hand, will support this reluctantly, not on what Councillor Brannan has said, but on the actual other side, where I would have liked to see a 0% increase and not have reduced the RCMP. I think there are creative ways, like Councillor Yoakum has said, without even reducing staff, that we can find better ways like purchasing power and leverage, and hopefully we can figure out other sources of revenue. I think are options that we can look at. So next year, I think I'm going to be pushing a lot more diligence to get this budget down to zero. I'm not putting any hopes in with a core review, with or without it. I think we can do a good job. I think if we put our heads to it, with or without it. So I will support this, but reluctantly the other way. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Pratt.
Thank you. Well, we're all reluctant tonight, that's clear. And I am as well. And it is more along the lines of both Councillor Brennan and Councillor Thorpe. And it's in regard to our the fact that we are coming into a core review. We don't seem to be able to get there. We're spending a lot of time, we spent a lot of time on the budget, trying to find ways to cut it. And I felt that was misplaced time, because I really felt that we should just be focusing on the core review and getting on with it and deciding with the core review what needs to be in place and what doesn't. That's what a core review is all about. And that is, I believe, where we should have gone immediately. However, we didn't, and we are where we are now. And I will be supporting this budget tonight, but I wish it had stayed at its original 1.8. Thank you.
Thank you. Seeing no further speakers, I call the question.
What motion's on the floor?
The motion to receive for information. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Can I have a mover for the motion that Financial Plan Bylaw 2015 number 7206 passed first reading, please? Moved, seconded. Thank you. Any discussion? Seeing none? All those in favor? Opposed? Councillor Bestwick opposed? Motion carries. Can I have a motion that the bylaw 2015-7206 pass second reading, please? Seconded. Thank you. Any discussion? Seeing none? All those in favor? Opposed? Councillor Bestwick opposed? Motion carries. Motion that Financial Plan Bylaw 2015-7206 pass third reading. So moved. Seconded. All those in favor? Opposed? Councillor Bestwick opposed? Carried. Motion carries. Thank you. Now, Tax Rates Bylaw 2015 number 7210 to fix the tax rates bylaw upon real property in the city of Nanaimo and to provide the payment of taxes for the year 2015. Can I have a motion that bylaw 2015-7210 pass first reading, please? It's moved. Seconded. Thank you. Discussion. Seeing none, all those in favor? Opposed? Councillor Bestwick opposed? Motion carries. Motion that Tax Rate Bylaw 2015 number 7210 pass second reading. So moved. Seconded. Thank you. Discussion. Seeing none, all those in favor? Opposed? Councillor Bestwick opposed? Motion carries. Motion that Tax Rate Bylaw 2015-7210 pass third reading. So moved. Seconded. Thank you. Discussion. Seeing none, all those in favor? Opposed? Councillor Bestwick opposed. Motion carries. Thank you. Next item, development permit number DP 735 2310 Northfield Road to obtain council authorization to issue a development permit to construct a commercial development. The motion is on page 75. Can I have Councillor Bestwick move? Seconder?
Second.
Councillor Kipp second. Discussion. Seeing none, I call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Development permit number DP 852 440 Selby Street. There's a recommendation on page 93 that council provide direction with respect to the requested parking variance and issue a development permit DP 852 at 440 Selby Street. Do I have a mover? Move it, Councillor Bestwick. Seconder? Seconded. Thank you. Mr. Swaby.
So, Your Worship, you'll note that there's two recommendations that staff need First of all, direction on the parking variance that's been requested, and the second is to issue the development permit for form and character with the setback variances. And I thought I'd just comment, because I have a comment at the end of the report regarding the parking variance that I wanted to put forward to council. And I think that there's a couple ways that I came at this that I wanted council to understand. The first being that hotels is definitely a priority in the community, all types of hotels, and this hotel would meet a certain niche of the hotel market that we were hoping to gain rooms, and this would provide that. And probably more important is that this is in a parking buyout area, which means that the developer doesn't have to provide any parking on site, that the parking can all be purchased for $3,000 a parking stall. And just 2 roads over, you don't have to provide any parking or buy any parking out in the actual downtown core. So here we have a situation where the developer doesn't actually have to provide any parking on site. And staff, when we first met with the applicant, decided to engage him in a process that would have a traffic study provide for the number of parking spaces that this hotel would require. And in doing that, the parking study identified that based on the, of course, occupancy rates in Nanaimo, and in 2014, the occupancy rates of a hotel were 44%. And in 2015 to date, they're about 48, 49%, somewhere in that neighborhood. So you can see just applying those numbers, even at 50% to the required parking of 45 spaces, that there's considerably less parking that should be required just based on the parking occupancy rates of other hotels in their community. And in this case, the developer has said that in addition to the parking variance that his parking study recommended, he would purchase 10 parking spaces towards the buyout space. And that's the alternative that I'm recommending that council adopt, is option 3, which is to vary the parking requirements by 10 spaces, required on-site 25 spaces, and have a payout of 10 spaces at $3,000 per space.
Thank you. Councillor Bestwick. Oh, pardon me. Go ahead.
Thank you. Thank you for that, Mr. Swaby. So we're speaking specifically to hotel when you speak to the 48 or 44% occupancy, but this has a restaurant of 36 seats and a conference component or meeting rooms and a spa and salon. So I'm just curious then, we're to waive the parking from 45 to 35 for the hotel, given that there's other business operations, number one. And number two is that the $3,000 amount, arriving at $3,000 to purchase parking, or is that just to not have the parking requirement of 45? I'm confused on what the $30,000 gets them.
Mm-hmm. So, Your Worship, to start with, let's start with the uses, because you brought up a good point, and this is where there was some discretion on staff's part in terms of how we evaluated the parking on site. And if you think of the hotels that have restaurants, most of them have restaurants that provide morning breakfast and that sort of thing. And this is an internally accessed, my understanding, restaurant that is primarily for the patrons who are staying at the hotel. So in most hotels, if not all of them, we would never calculate an additional parking requirement for the hotel. It's just 1 space per room for the hotel. It's just an assumed amenity that comes along with the hotel. In terms of the meeting space, keep in perspective that, and Mr. Lindsay can correct me if I'm wrong, that the size of this space is the size of maybe under 500 square feet, or so it's a very small meeting space, just a community meeting space. So it's not going to generate the kinds of issues that you might have at the coast in terms of their meeting spaces. Now back to the parking buyout. It is an old bylaw, you're right. $3,000 per parking space does not cover 1/3 of an at-grade parking spot. They're about $10,000 per stall, and if you go underground, you can triple that. So the idea is that in this area, Whatever the parking requirement is, the developer or the owner can purchase all of the parking that's required on site and not provide any, with the assumption that they'll park in the parkade or the parking lot that the parking bylaw is related to. Now, before we established how much parking they would buy out, we wanted to establish what the right number is for the use, and that's why they did a traffic study, a parking study, to establish what the demands would be in this case for this proposed use, and they came up with their number as noted in the report.
Thank you. Just to follow up, I'm still somewhat confused on the 10 times 3,000 at 30 and where they're going to purchase parking. But the neighborhood impact, so the neighborhood impact of on-street parking in that area, I would have to assume will have some impact when I go look at that very small site and the activity that's going on around that site with residential across the street and the provincial building on the corner. I would have to think that there's going to be considerable on-street parking as a first option if I'm a tenant or a hotel guest, then I can park for free on the street or have to go find parking and pay for it elsewhere.
Sorry if that's a question, Your Worship. The assumption based on the traffic study is that providing 25 on-site parking spaces will meet the needs of this development at peak times. And if you think of the hotel that's built beside 7-Eleven and they provide parking at one per unit, and if their occupancy is 40%, you imagine how many parking spaces are not being utilized.
Well, good point. And then I guess we have to talk the good point about the fairness of insisting that at that time of development that they had to have one per. But the Ramada on Terminal Avenue doesn't have a restaurant, and they have a significant parking lot requirement. So I'm just trying to establish fairness and equity, regardless of where and the hotels reside. Thank you.
Councillor Hong.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just a couple of questions to staff. Like I said, I do have a concern with on-street parking. My main thing is now a lot of it is 2-hour resident exempt. Is that going to change? Because if the hotel patrons fill up, we'll say that they get, during the summer peak hours, 45, where are they going to be parking? Is that going to displace some of our residents in that area?
Well, Your Worship, the assumption is, based on the traffic study, that there wouldn't be an issue. If there is overflow parking, then the good news is the hotels are at full occupancy. I guess that's good. The bad news is they would have to find alternative parking, which would include parkades in the area or on-street parking.
Okay.
And I think this is something that will warrant more discussion. It's not a topic for today, but who owns the street parking is a good question in terms of uses in the neighborhood.
Great. Follow up with that, a couple more. Where does the $30,000 go? Like, what pot does it go into? And are they're not getting any tax exemptions, like a 10-year tax exemption, are they for this?
Mr. Lindsay.
First of all, in terms of Councillor Hong's question about where does the money go, it sort of goes back to the earlier question about where does the $3,000 come from. So there was actually 2 bylaws that were established a number of years ago. And when you have a parking buyout bylaw, you have to identify a parking lot where the additional parking is intended to go. And then any money you acquire through cash in lieu goes to improvements in those parking lots. So the 2 parking lots that are identified under our bylaws are the one on Prudhoe, if you can picture behind the train station, and the other one that's on the corner of Wallace and Wentworth. Those are the 2 lots that are identified by bylaws. So the money that would be obtained through the cash in lieu, would go towards improvements. In this case, it would go towards the one at Prudhoe Street. And I'm sorry, the second question was tax. There's no tax exemption that's been discussed at this time. But if they came forward, that would ultimately be Council's decision under their policy.
Councillor Kipp.
Yeah, the 3,000 per site downtown was to give people commercial build out right from border to border. So we've done that. It's probably an old figure now, but it's working. Staff from Transportation and Planning does not agree with the peak parking demand conclusion. Am I correct?
Your Worship, my comment on that would be that staff reviewed specifically the applicant's traffic impact study, which, if I'm discussing, it probably makes the most sense to look at the chart on page 97 in your agenda. So their traffic study was what I would describe here as option 2. So staff, the planning, as you mentioned, the planning and engineering staff reviewed that option and felt that there was some difficulties with the rationale in the traffic study. The third option is one that was not evaluated by planning or engineering staff. It's one that came in afterwards by the consultant by the applicant in an attempt to bridge the discrepancy between staff's position and the position that was found in their traffic study.
Thank you.
Councillor Fuller.
Yeah, I'm very concerned with the parking in that area. I know those streets. I know there are a lot of residents in the daytime. There's a lot of people will park on the street in order to access the courthouse that's on the corner of Selby and Albert. Now, correct me if I'm wrong, but you're saying that they don't even have to provide any spaces? So legitimately, if they wanted to, they could just give us $135,000 and say, there you go, we're not providing any spaces?
Correct.
This is bizarre. Literally, this is just bizarre. I can't wrap my head around this. We've just started putting signs up at Nob Hill Park because people were parking there throughout the day and they could get away with it. Now it's a 2-hour residence exempt. Hopefully that will alleviate a bit of their problems. But those people that were parking there during the day are now going to have to find other places to park. So they could be taking up these parking lots that are in the area, the pay parking lots. I just find this totally bizarre.
Councillor Brennan.
Thank you. Are you ready for a motion yet? Because it sounds to me like people are arguing there is a motion on the floor, and it was for what? Well, no, because it didn't give direction.
Correct.
So there is no motion on the floor with regard to the parking.
One of the three?
Yeah, okay. It's just like it's like a game of chance. I mean, it's not that easy to make a distinction between the staffs and the CAOs. But I'll try alternative 3 because it's more than the applicant suggested, but it's less than they might have been asked. And if I get a seconder, I'll speak to it.
Councillor, seconded by Councillor Brandt, Councillor Bestwick.
I don't think it's entirely unusual for a city to have a hotel with, for want of a better word, inadequate parking. I know that in Victoria they use valet parking to take cars 2-3 blocks away to other parking lots. So these things can happen. I don't want to discourage this hotel in the downtown. I think it's an interesting project, and if we just have to tinker a bit with the parking requirements, I don't think that that's a bad thing. I like the idea of a small, maybe a boutique hotel close to Albert, close to downtown, walkable to our amenities downtown makes sense to me. So if we get the transportation hub that we're hoping for down on the Wellcox land, then it's easily accessed by taxi. I think it's a good idea. I think we should be encouraging these smaller type developments and just and make sure that what we can do, we do without betraying the public's interest in this. I think that we can accommodate this request.
Sorry, Mr. Jackson.
Thank you, Your Worship. I just wanted to clarify the motion for the record, please.
Yes.
Alternate variance proposed by applicant, 30,000, 10 times 3,000.
Under provision of Part 1 of the motion, providing direction. Thank you. Councillor Thorpe.
Mr. Mayor. Yes, I'll support option 3 as well. I think this hotel is a good project. I'd like to see it move forward, and I think option 3 provides a good compromise position regarding the parking. I'll be supporting it.
Thank you. Seeing no further speakers, I call a question. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Councillor Fuller opposed. Did you count any others? Thank you. Councillor Fuller opposed. Thank you. Next item, development permit number DP 909 at 6330 McRobb Avenue.
Do we have to do number 2 on that in the previous one? Your
I
Worship?
thought we did them together.
Did we do them together?
Yeah.
Your Worship, what I understand it to be is option 3 for the first,
Yes.
and it included the second part.
Correct.
In that motion.
Thank you. So on 6330 McRobb Avenue, the purpose is to obtain council authorization for a development permit to construct a 50-unit rental multifamily residential project. And we have 3 delegations. The first one is Mr. Darush Firozalo. Oh, come on. Please, come up here and correct me. Firozli. Thank you. The architect on behalf of the applicant. Please, go ahead, sir.
Worship and Councillor, my name is Dariush Firuzli, architect AIBC. Over 25 years experience, pleasure to live and work in Nanaimo for last 9 years. These projects we are doing for client, I'll let the clients introduce himself and then do the very short introducing the projects.
Thank you for your time. I'm not really familiar with council meetings, so I'll try and keep it brief and to the point, but we're essentially a second-generation family business that's been in Nanaimo for over 20 years. We have approximately 400 multifamily units. I currently live in Victoria, however, I was raised in Saltaire and Chemainus, so my sister's gone to VIU. I know the area pretty well. I wanted to stress that the project in front of you, it's being done for us. We'll be managing it, our family. We're intending to own it. We're not trying to flip out of a project quickly. We intend for it to be a success, and we stand by basically what we're proposing for the long term, because again, it will be us that's owning it. This is actually our 4th rental project. My brother-in-law and I, we worked on the Madrona Green project right by Rock City, behind Rock City Mall on Country Club Drive, and we're currently doing one in Langford with Darush, and another smaller one in Victoria, along with this.
Why would you do one there?
In Victoria, I
In
don't
Langford.
know. No, Langford's okay. Victoria, I honestly don't know. But that's another.
Go ahead, sir.
So very fast, just some content in the site. This is the aerial photo, shows the Texada in the right-hand side, the 1879 unit, I believe, 4-story with the underground parking. And the property is in left-hand side and all the townhouses around this area. Also, the property southwest of our property, this is the zone for 215 units, 15-story building. This is the previous DP approved. Original idea was to mirror the Texada, provide another around 80 units there, condominium. Just wanted to point out a few things. One, those green area we saw in the previous slides there is not anymore there with that design, and also the 90-degree perpendicular parking at the Centennial Drive. So back to the site plan, this is our strategy for designing these projects. First of all, city block. We do have a Texeda covering the corner of the Upland and Macrob. We are providing another corner at the Macrob and Centennial to create that block design for the city. Saving the trees. The trees, the only trees remaining from the previous development is there. We are strongly like to keep those one. Ocean view is in the up sides, almost curved. You can see through the north. And also smaller scale of the building. As you see, the Texeda is almost like wall standing of the views, and even in previous design, it was same thing in here. Will be going to be wall covering almost in front of those townhouses. So I'm going to show some pictures of the site. These are the three we were talking. This is the picture from Texeda toward to the west. Drive aisle between the Texeda and our property. View from Macrob. Townhouses more west. This is the angle I will show the 3D rendering corner of the Centennial Drive and Macrob. More pictures shows all around the site. This is a Texeda site. They have a 2 sidewalk connecting to the central. More trees. Here is what we are proposing. As you see, we are wanting to make it 2-phase projects. Phase 1 will be in the corner of the Macrob and Centennial Drive. As footprint, you see, is less than 50% of the Texeda site. And the next phase will be down in the south side. We are keeping the trees area over there. There is access areas coming, but we're keeping that trees and also leaving the corridor view from the for Texeda people who is living in here. They can see the ocean as well as our second phase. They will have a view there. Landscape plan shows all lower floor plan units. They do have access to all the sidewalk. Majority of the units in the Centennial Drive, they just access from the Centennial Drive sidewalk. They do have a parking right in front of the units. They can park and just go inside. We did work very closely with the city. City was talking about the micro units, the required needs in town, handicap rental units. It looks like there is none in the town. So based on the city's recommendation, we have 3 micro units, 1 handicap units, 22 one-bedroom, and 24. Basically, we are more than 50% of 1 bedroom or less. Upper floor, this is the view from the inside, basically from parking area. This will be from the Centennial Drive. And this is that angle in the pictures from site I was talking about. You can see it in the background, Texeda buildings back there. One of the previous DP has actually relaxation on height. They were 4.5 story like the Texeda. We are not asking for any height variance. The only variance we are here for is the parking variance. Required parking per unit is 1.66. We provide 1.32. Translating to numbers, required 83 parking stalls. We provide 66. So here is our rationale for those rational requests. Saving the trees. We We had the areas which is the existing trees. We don't want to cut those trees and making it to parking. We don't think that's a good idea to do that. Our units basically ratio is more than 50%. They are one bedroom or less. We do have two major routes for buses through the Uplands and Hammond Bay, around up to Upland bus station 100 meter. For Hammond Bay Road is around 400 meters. We do have storage in all the units, as well as the 264 square feet bike storage in the building, inside the building. McGarry Elementary and Dover Bay High School they are very close by. People who are living in here, they can walk. They don't need to basically drive there. Shopping mall and all other amenity around the building is very close by. And client experience over the, actually I'm wrong, over says 20 years, 30 years. With the 8 buildings right now existed in Nanaimo with 399, we provide the numbers actually provided and how much actually used. It shows is less than 1.3. In other hand, also we do have an excess area, which is we are planning to have a gravel parking area to remaining of the 1.66 and monitor during the working the days building, because end of the day practicality is important for our client to work his business model and use that basically experience to phase 2. End of the day when phase 2 come up, these total number has to work to in total for, because it is one property, is not 2 property. 15 seconds, I'm early.
Thank you very much. Are there any questions for the delegation? I've got a couple. Micro units. This is what you would call sticking your big toe in the water. I know that there are other micro units under construction, and including along town site, and we believe that we're starting to see a market for the micro units. So is it, would you have originally intended to have done micro units or at the urging of?
It actually was something that the city staff mentioned to us at first, and we've, I've seen in Victoria there's a trend towards it. Victoria's it's concerning me there because I think it's a personal, they're doing it all over the place. And the market for it is, it's good if it's part of a mixed use, like in some of our existing buildings, we do have some smaller, and you will find someone, for an elderly person on a fixed income pension that wants to live in a building with different options rather than just a rooming house essentially, and they'll be willing to do that at a more affordable option. So it's something that we wanted to try and intersperse with a project rather than come up with, say, 50 micro units and create a sort of a ghetto effect to it. We thought it was important to have a diversity, and with Darush, even on the floor plans, there is a diversity of floor plans, the way we've laid out. We have the one, John Horn, I believe, mentioned it to us a long time. Actually, this is a few years ago on a different topic mentioned about the need for a mobility restricted unit. And that's something I think there'll be a lot more demand for that in the future. So it's one thing we're going to be putting in on the ground floor, wheelchair accessible with a larger shower, larger turnstile. So it's mainly diversity. A micro unit, it's not something I'd personally want to do throughout. But when it's interspersed one for floor, it does create a diversity of people and options for tenants.
Just a small things we thought is actually the micro unit is better to condo in downtown area rather than for rental in the north. But we did just recently another project, 17 units, 8 of 17 is micro unit in downtown. It is under basically building permit review.
And we do have one in Country Club in another one of our buildings, and actually we were surprised there actually was a significant demand. There is significant demand for it, and they are elderly people on fixed income that pay about $500 a month, and it works. And also the micro unit we did it so especially on the top floor, it's only 3. They all have larger balconies. There'll be storage that they can use on that floor, and the roof is raised, so there's a bigger feeling of open space.
Thank you. I know someone who lives on Madrona Green, and they love that building. Thank you. I know you build quality product. Councillor Kipp.
Just on the accessibility for units, universal design, getting to all of our units with wider doors, easier handles versus round knobs, light switching heights, low sills, all of those things have to come forward in universal design because we're all going to have trouble over time with an aging population. So, and then instead of the word ghettoizing, I'd say monoculture. Thank you.
Sorry.
No, it's just...
I see no further speakers. Thank you very much. Yes, sir.
It's a personal comment. If the one with the lower counters and mobility restricted works on phase 2, it's something we'd like to implement more of. It's just we are apprehensive because we just haven't seen it. That's the
universal design.
Thank you. Thank you.
Sorry.
Thank you. Thank you very much. We have a second speaker, Mr. John Pellick.
Good evening, Mayor and Council.
Good evening.
I'm here representing the residents of the Texada in the Dover community. We're here tonight really to oppose the additional dropping of the 17 extra parking stalls. And I'd like to take you through a little scenario of where we live and what we're faced with right now and what's coming up in the future. The Texada at 6310 McRobb is bordered by some small streets that were put in during its development stage that we thought were private. The developer at the end went and sold the other property where we all thought we were getting a mirrored image. And please don't get me wrong, I'm not here to oppose what's going in there. It's just the parking. So this roadway right now is only wide enough for one vehicle to go either way, north-south, south-north. Down across the Texada area. We even have problems right now with gardeners or so forth that are parking there. Cars cannot get around. A lot of it is elderly traffic. There is a tremendous amount of people walking through that area. The green space is nice, but I understand we're going to lose it. If we look at, just change this, we're in basically R8, and then the new development is going to be our neighbors at 6330. R9, as you've already heard, is going to be 2 high-rise towers. And I'm assuming they're going to have to go with underground parking. That in itself is going to bring a tremendous amount of more traffic into the area on these small streets. The area just below R8, which I understand now has just been purchased, it's a vacant field, that you can go anytime during the day and find numerous cars parked in there as an overflow. Where they're from, I can't tell you, but every day they're in there. That area has been picked up, and I understand it's going to be the Nanaimo Seniors Home that's building in there. So that is going to create another area like Kalinda that I have showing here right now. Every day that street is full. You're lucky to find a spot to park. If we get additional cars that do not have allocated spaces for it, where will they go? And what will it do to the residents in the area? This here is a picture right now of the property, the vacant property that I was just speaking about that the seniors home will be developing. All of these cars, whether it's raining or snowing or whatever, they're there every day. Whether it's people from the bus garage or it's overflow right now for the seniors home, I'm not sure, but they're there. Where will these extra cars go is what I'm asking. And the other issue, what we're trying to figure out is why all the 4-story buildings in the area have underground parking and this one doesn't. Is there a change? Is there a routing in the bylaw that we're omitting? I'd also like to point out that these bylaws have been cast in stone and have been on your books for many years, done by previous councils that you have inherited and have an order to upkeep. If you change this bylaw and allow this parking to go through, I do ask you that you do it with concern about the regular people that will live there, about the students that are coming from Dover School, and we all know they don't walk on the streets side by side. The elderly people that walk through there. The emergency vehicles that right now, if it comes down our main street off McRobb, will plug the streets up. There's no way you'll get anything inside or out of that street. Although I believe this developer and his architect have tried really hard to make the building presentable, and I think they've done a great job, and they seem to be very easy to deal with, what I'm asking you tonight is to send it back to them and see if they can get creative and find a few more spots where at the end of this, the area residents won't be held hostage to a new development. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Pratt.
I just want to clarify, and it's on this picture that you have on the screen right now. So you're saying this is a vacant lot?
This is a vacant lot, right?
And so people are just parking there every day,
yes,
free?
Pretty much.
Yeah, yeah. And you're not sure where they're coming from, but that's overflow traffic from somewhere. Yeah. Okay, thank you.
Just to add to that, right behind Calinda is the bus depot. It could be workers from the bus station. Also, Costco is right near there. It's a lot of traffic in a highly desirable area.
Thank you very much. So you don't have any idea where these cars are coming from?
No, I can't say to where they're from. They change every day, and they're there every day.
Can you help me? Is that Texada there? What's the name of that building?
That's the Texada that you see up there.
Okay. Do they charge per parking? Do you know?
No. When you purchase your condo, there you will get a parking stall, either one or two per unit.
And do you know if there's parking spaces available in that building?
I think we're pretty full.
No. Thank you. Seeing no further.
Actually, I do.
Motion to.
I actually have a question.
Oh, you do. Go ahead, Councillor Brennan.
You know, I'm really torn about this because I know that we have a fairly recently adopted transportation plan that attempts to move people out of cars and onto transit to do their business in the city. And if we accommodate all the cars with more parking, then we kind of interfere with our ability to actually push that transportation policy ahead, where we're getting people out of cars and onto buses or walking or bicycles. And when I look at the discussion or the presentation from the developer, they are kind of addressing those things with the bike racks inside the building, with the micro units. I think that those residents are less likely to need parking spaces. So help me with that. What is the neighborhood willing to contribute to advancing a transportation plan that assists us with some sort of climate change issues that we're trying to tackle? And so how do we do that when we propose reduced parking spaces to implement, that helps us implement a transportation plan, but the neighborhood says that interferes with our quality of life too much? So talk to me about that. How does that work?
When we all purchased our condos there, we knew there would be another 80-unit mirrored image right across the street from us, and we were happy with that. Because of the designs and the structure of the Texada with parking underground and parking outside, and complete with we have seven visitor parking stalls. We are looking now at 2 large high-rises, and I understand where you're coming from. But people still have transportation, they still have vehicles, and they have to leave them somewhere, even if they take a bus downtown to work. And what we're seeing now is they're parking up and along the streets. They're being left there all day. Probably Calinda is packed till about 8:39 at night when the seniors' residents start to slow down on visitations. What are we going to do when they start blocking our lanes and blocking our parking stalls and that kind of issue? All I'm asking council tonight to do is to review this. Can the architect pull out another 7 spots or 8 spots so it's not so drastic? to what, we're not saying, no, we want the whole 17 thrown in there. We're just saying to relieve the issue that's going to happen down the road. We're going to be back here on council's case talking to you about parking violations, street signage so that people don't park, security. We already have security issues with the Texada with cars outside and inside. That's everywhere. That's not going to go away. I hope I addressed your question.
You did, actually, because I think if I understood you, you said we're not asking for the full 17.
No.
We would be satisfied with a few more. Thank you.
Councillor Hong.
Thank you, Your Worship. Is it possible to bring the architect back so I can ask him questions?
Certainly, once we get finished with this delegation.
Oh, okay. Thank you.
Sure. Councillor Thorpe.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just a comment, if I may. I do live not far from this site, and I know the area well, and I did walk through it this morning. And I first of all think that this project on the whole is a great fit for that lot, and I think it will complement the Texada, and I don't think you're disputing that. But I would say, based on my observations in the neighborhood, that I have to agree that parking is a problem. And I certainly acknowledge that, and I would like to see some further accommodation made for that.
Thank you.
Thank you.
No further speakers. Thank you, sir.
Thank you very much.
Next speaker. Motion to receive the delegation. Second. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thank you. Mr. James Harris, on behalf of Strata Council of Pacific Place Strata. Go ahead, sir.
Worship, councillors, I'm Jim Harris, a resident of Pacific Place Strata. I'm here to explain to you why our strata is opposed to granting the variance to reduce the number of parking stalls at TP 909 or 6330 McRobb, depending on how you want to call it. A 50-unit apartment building from 83 stalls to 66 stalls. Now here, you see Sentinel Drive. Sentinel Drive is a U-shaped drive, and if you can see it here, it just runs around like this, over to Texada, and then back onto McRobb. But here is Nonami Street, I call it. Oops, hit the button again. That's No Name Street. It hasn't got a name, but it connects Kalinda, Sentinel, and McRobb, and we get a lot of traffic going from McRobb over to Kalinda as a shortcut. It's a real problem, and I'm wondering if there's going to be parking on Sentinel here, and then in phase 2 here, it's a very narrow street. It's only 24 feet wide. It's a strata street, and it's going to create havoc with people coming out here, people using this, et cetera, et cetera. Here's the basic plan. It's a nice building. I think that it'll be attractive to younger couples who can't afford a condo or a house. Most will likely own two vehicles. We believe that the ratio of 1.66 stalls, as required by the city parking bylaw, is realistic for the type of development and see no justification for a variance to be granted. We have no problem with the building per se, but our concern is with the proposed parking. Now, here's the architect's drawing. This is, oops, hold on here. There. This is McRobb here. Here's Sentinel. This looks like a parking lot, but it's really not. This gray car right here is where Pacina Place is, the entry to our strata complex. Here it is here. If they go ahead with parking in this area here, you'll have cars parked where the right rear wheel of the Chevrolet is located. So you're going to have cars backing into the intersection. To me, that's not a very safe situation. I don't think the city would allow that on a city street either. Now here's the architect's drawing of Sentinel Drive and Pacina Place. Looks fine, except this is only 24 feet wide, and these cars are going to have to back out into the entrance to our complex. And I find that a little bit bizarre. Here's a shot taken from approximate same position as the architect's drawing with Texada in the background. And I think you can see how narrow that street really is. Again, another shot of the parking area looking into our development. And right over here is a fire hydrant. There's no plan, nothing on the plans that indicate that's there anymore, and I'm a bit concerned what's going to happen to that fire hydrant, because that is a safety feature, and it also is a feature for our insurance costs. If we have a fire hydrant close, our insurance for our buildings are a heck of a lot cheaper. This is how wide that street is. There's 2 cars there right now. You can't get 3 through. And this area over here, this is where the parking would be. Now, we went and looked at the other developments, or the other units that Groupe Deneuve have in town. We found 7 of them on site, so we went and took a look at them. This is the one on, this is the Barron's Villa on Barron. This is the front of the building, and back here, off-street parking. They've got another building on Barron's. Again, all the parking is off-street, so it's not interfering with anybody else's cars going by. Madrona Green, a nice complex. I think it looks very nice. And you'll notice there's no parking here at all. All the curbs are painted yellow. Now the next slide, this is the entrance to their parking lot. And voila, under-building parking as part of the parking complex. Next door is the Country Club Manor. Again, a full parking lot off the street. You don't have interference with traffic. Parkland House, same thing. All the parking is off-street, no traffic interference. St. George Manor on St. George Crescent. Again, all the parking is off-street. And finally, I couldn't find the other one. There's 8, I don't know where it is. This is Villa Eva Townhouse on Wakasea. Again, all the parking is off-street. Now, we feel the proposed building at 6330 McRobb will be a positive addition to the community. That we don't dispute. Our main concern is with the parking arrangements. This is phase 1 of a proposed 2-phase development. We wonder where the parking for phase 2 will go, because there's not a lot of room on this property. We feel that this variance is being requested so that the developer doesn't have to install under-building parking. One of the main things that sort of upset us at our strata was that neither the developer nor the city has contacted our strata concerning the change in usage of Sentinel Drive. 66 parking spaces are insufficient for a building of this size and will lead to overflow parking on McRobb and Sentinel. The proposed 66 parking spaces includes visitor parking. That means fewer resident parking spots. All the other multi-story buildings in our area have under-building parking. Sentinel is not a city street. It's a strata street, and it's only 24 feet wide. I think most city streets are, what, 34 feet wide? Depending on the... Yeah. The ones I measured were about 34, so they're 10 feet wider. Pacific Place Strata owns a portion of Sentinel Drive, and the developer has not asked our permission to make changes to our street. The Nanaimo parking bylaws say we are to have unfettered access to our property. Access to our property will be compromised and fettered if parking is allowed on Sentinel. The proposed parking arrangement will impede owners at Pacific Place Strata from entering and leaving Pacina Place. We are concerned about the potential liability of the hazardous condition presented by the addition of parking opposite the entrance to our complex. This will lead to increased liability to the Strata Corporation. Extra traffic and construction on Sentinel will lead to increased road maintenance costs for all owners. Because there's no under-building parking in this proposed development, there is a decided lack of green space. We are asking the Nanaimo City Council to reject the parking variance for this project and direct the developer to modify their plans so as to eliminate parking on Sentinel Drive and maintain the parking ratio at 1.66 stalls per unit, or 83 spaces. We would also recommend that under-building parking be incorporated in this development, similar to that at Texada. Thank you. Any
you very
questions?
much. Councillor Thorpe, do you have a question?
No,
Thank you. Thank you. I see no speakers. Thank you, sir.
Okay.
So, staff, pardon me, you wanted to have the architect come back. Go ahead, please.
If I can get the architect back, just a question, please. Great, thank you. Your Worship, I just wanted to know is, I think the architect and the owner were saying that they were pretty active with regards to phase 2. So you were going to see what phase 1 was going to be like and make adjustments if necessary to accommodate phase 2.
That's correct.
Are you going to be asking for a parking variance in phase 2 as well?
After phase 1 basically work and then they get the experience what the parking requirements is, it will be applied for that point. In that point, we may actually go and provide for 1.66 for entire, or to go with whatever is practical, basically, requirements is.
So do you have any design drawings for, I guess, phase 2? I'd like to know if that ratio right now is based on the 1.66, or are you going to plan on following the ratio that you're...
We do have a site plan, shows the location of the phase 2, and we roughly calculated 1.3 for phase 2. That's partially, there is underneath the building. If it's required, actually, we are thinking even go underground for phase 2 to add, if required, additional.
Okay, so at this point...
there is no design, basically.
Okay.
We have just site plan.
So with that in mind, I don't know when you're planning on phase 2, but looking at your drawings here, it looks like you can probably squeeze 7 or 8 more parking stalls on this edge here, if possible.
Yes, that's possible.
To make it happen and then come to council, I would like to see in phase 2, and would reconsider seeing how your parking situation is and to see what the residents would say at that point. How do you feel about that?
No, we agree. We during design panel, it was brought up about that, and we discussed providing overflow parking even if it's gravel. And I did want to point out that some of the buildings, pretty much all of the buildings that are existing ones in the family that we're showing, they're actually 1-to-1 or less. A lot of them, especially so. There's not much street parking. It's all contained because they actually are underutilizing their parking from a rental perspective.
Oh, yeah, I probably agree with you like that. So a lot of people that own rentals don't have cars, and that's the case. But to entertain and to keep the residents in that area happy, you're going to have assurances for them that you're going to have overflow parking. I just wanted to see how we can make the community happy with this project. I think we all agree that the project is great. I think we just have issues with parking at this point. Thank you.
Excuse me, there is a few small, fast points I would like to say about the one delegate they mentioned about the parking right in the corner of the Macrob, and by cities, by basically requirements, 8.5 meters off the intersection, we cannot have any closer than 8.5 meters, and our drawings meet that basically. Hydrant, we do have islands between the parking and Centennial Drive, and that hydrant, it is in one of those islands, is no replacement or removal. Rental type of the building, as Robin already talked about that. Urban design, backing up to this actually reduce the speed of the traffic, create the urban type, and actually, in my mind, make the more safer space, the people, they don't speed. And one last thing is there is a covenant between all these properties actually allowed any property to have off the Centennial Drive parking as well as the Texada, right in the Texada doing the same thing. In the old DP has the same thing in other side. So this is a covenant in these property. Whoever purchased the property probably should notice about that.
And sorry, the overflow parking, my understanding with visiting was it's actually for some people are working at the senior center. So I don't think it's indicative of residents that are living there that are clogging up the parking in the streets.
Thank you. I think I've got three more speakers, so don't go too far. I just wanted to remind council on page 102, there's some actual comparisons on the buildings that the people, that this operator owns. And I'm looking forward to the Transportation and Planning Committee reviewing parking regulations. 1.66 appears to be far in excess of what today's needs are. If we look at Mr. Molnar's two buildings, one on Terminal and the other one down on Town Site that he's constructing right now, well, in actual fact, we're seeing that actuals in those areas are around 0.66 of actual registration. So we need to be mindful of where the world is actually going as opposed to where it's been. Councillor Fuller.
Well, actually, I was going to point out pretty much exactly what Councillor Hong said. It looks like from the diagram that there would be room for at least 6 or 7 spaces. I guess if I'm looking at the property line or whatever, between 66, parking lot 66, to the left of that, it looks like you could fit 7 spaces, no problem, in there. Yeah, I really don't see the need to go to the 166 idea, but I mean, if you can put those spaces in, that'll meet the needs of one of the delegations. That's what they were asking for, 7 or 8 more spaces. Yeah. And I don't see a problem with the backing out of the ones that abut the one road. I mean, I live on a very busy street, and when I'm backing out, you know, I'm looking both ways to make sure what's coming. So I can't see them having to go into that spot. But yeah, I mean, if you could do those 7 or 8 spaces, I think that'd be great.
Yeah, this is easy just to adjust, and my client is happy to do that.
Thank you. Next, Councillor Pratt.
Thank you. I have to admit that the backing out issue does seem like a problem for me in looking at it. And I guess the reason I feel that way is because I live in a strata units where we're coming out onto a very busy, narrow street with a lot of parking on it. So when you're coming out of our condo, you can't even see what's coming either way. If you're backing out, I think it would even be worse. And the neighbors across the street have a terrible time backing out. In fact, most of them, if they can, try to back into their lots so that they can drive out rather than back out, because it's so busy and so hard to see what's coming and going. So I do see that as a problem. I know it's a huge problem on my street, and so I can certainly understand where that strata unit is coming from and where that might be a problem for them.
Thank you. Councillor Yocum.
Thank you, Your Worship. First of all, I think your project's great. I really admire when we have housing options for different levels of incomes in our city, options for such as you mentioned. The question I have is more for probably Mr. Lindsay, is if they went back and were able to do your architect stuff and find those 5, 7 or whatever stalls, would it be a long turnover? Because I'm in favor of the project. I'm a fan of the project so far. But if we can help reduce some of the concerns around the parking, would it be a long turnover, or would it just be depends how quick they got it to you?
You say how long it takes staff to get back.
Yeah, just so we can sort of.
So, Your Worship, I don't want to get ahead of where council is right now, but one of the options you could consider is simply amending the development permit that's in front of you this evening. I've heard the applicants say their ability to provide additional 6 stalls or 7 stalls. I guess we should get some clarity on that. But right now you have a variance from 83 to 66. If council supported the development permit but wanted to increase the number of stalls, you could simply amend the parking variance to go from 83 to 72 or 73, whatever the number that's decided upon. That way we could make that decision this evening and there'd be no time delay.
Okay, thank you. Thank you, Worship.
Yep. Councillor Bestwick.
Thank you. I don't think we can understate the concerns that parking is within other nodes in our city, and that we've experienced, be it in the University District, street parking, resident concerns, the need for parking study after parking study after parking study. The hospital area that we seem to wish to exacerbate an existing problem on Townsite Road and the gravel pit, as I would refer to it, developments that will only serve to add more cars. And while I'd like to have the ideology that we're all going to get out of our vehicles one day and take the bus, I don't think any of us here carpooled tonight or took the bus. But I'd like to think that those options may exist in some places and will help that to get people out of their vehicles. I like the project, but when I think of the bigger picture that there's going to be another one, and then there's going to be 2 more towers, and that there's going to be a seniors housing or whatever else is going to go somewhere else, and there's no parking provision. So we've gone from 83 to 66, and no provision for visitors. There's no provision for guests, from what I read and what I've listened to. So we seem to be making an assumption that there won't be any guests, there won't be any visitors. Or where are they going to park? Because I would suspect that the 66 parking spaces will be with signs that say reserved for residents only, because there's no parking for visitors. So where are they going to park? I can't imagine that they won't have any guests or visitors or babysitters or whatever. So there's going to be things that have to happen. So for me, it has to go back. For me, it has to go back to staff. And I'm not comfortable with making an on-the-spot decision tonight to say, oh, it's 6 spots. It's 5. So I would have to vote against the project if that's what the motion was.
Just on a point of order, Your Worship, it seems that the delegation is here to answer some questions, but it seems like there's a discussion going on as though there were a motion on the floor. So I'm just wondering if we could be a little...
I need to make some statements in order to be able to get to my point and question.
To the delegation or to the council?
Do you want to rule on this, or would you like me to rule on this?
No, do you have a question for the delegation?
You bet.
Okay, please go ahead.
Would you object if we return this to staff, for you to sit with staff to establish a more reasonable parking, a more appropriate and reasonable parking structure that would include visitors and homeowners?
We wish we are working very hard in the working drawings, and the plan was to start actual construction in June. We don't want to basically lose the construction time. We will appreciate if there is any way to reduce that process, but we also understand we easily can add the 6-7 units if
No, it would be great if we could come to a decision, because for us it's been over 6 months that we've been waiting. Weren't expecting. We've been waiting on the city and for a while. I guess the timing was bad with the...
Just to mention, we started 2 projects together in November, had in design panel presented. The other one is already building permit ready. This one, for some reason, takes already 6 months to get to this point. And we are not rezoning or asking any more than regular parking variance.
I sorry for that. I can't apologize. I don't know why it's taken 6 months. Maybe that's a good thing. That it maybe 12 months would have been. I can't answer that question. First, I've had this in front of me to make a decision on.
Councillor Pratt.
My
To
question.
the delegation.
Yeah, it isn't to the delegation, it's to staff regarding what I was talking about before. Is that not appropriate right now? Should I wait for the motion or?
You're the last speaker, so perhaps we can have a motion to receive the delegation. Someone seconded? Thank you. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thank you. Thank you.
Thank you.
Go ahead.
So my question to staff, just in regard to the parking issue of backing out onto a very narrow street, does that comply, or is that with the city's needs, the city's bylaws, the city's regulations?
Thank you, Your Worship. Through to Councillor Pratt. Maybe for the purposes of this discussion, I just maybe would turn you to page 104 in your agenda. There's a site plan there that shows the roads. When I'm speaking to it, you'll have a better idea what I'm talking about. A couple of the speakers made a point early on that this is a strata road. So this is not a City of Nanaimo road. Therefore, our standards do not apply here.
Okay.
So if you'll look at the drawing shown on page 104, the edge of the property is actually, of their property, is actually shown in that shaded gray color. So their property line runs right down the middle of that strata road right now. So that's their property. And as long as they provide ability for emergency vehicles to get through on that private strata road, we have very little else to say about it. There was the architect made a comment earlier that we do have under our bylaw requirements a minimum distance you have to be from the access before you can back out, and they've provided that here. It's difficult to read on that plan, but it's just under 9 meters from the actual edge of McRobb Road right-of-way back to that first parking stall. So there is, sorry, that's a long answer, but there is no ability for council to dictate the design of that.
Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Kipp.
Thank you. Through to staff, that road is 24 feet wide. Is that curb to new curb or curb to the end of the parking spot?
I don't know the exact measurement. What we would look for is a minimum of 6 meters in width for emergency access. So I think I heard one of the speakers earlier say that the 24 was the width, but I don't have that measurement.
A double lane in a parking lot's about 18 feet wide.
That's correct, yeah.
So 18, so in a parking lot, 2 cars can park and back out to another one of that. I understand that concern, like I say, on a slow road is probably a problem when people are backing out. But staff agrees with the parking reduction?
So, Your Worship, I think that's
Page 102?
Yeah, so maybe if we look at the, it's 102, the chart, yeah, 102 looks at a couple of the other parking variances that have been supported recently for rental apartment buildings. So there's a couple of things here I'd want to mention is, yes, staff support the variance that's requested, but that's based on our experience with rental buildings, taking some observations of what we're seeing in terms of actual usage. It's also based on city policy that says looking at our town centers under our official community plan, and our transportation plan talks about them as mobility centers, and it talks about in those areas that we should be looking at reducing parking requirements for multifamily developments. There's specific policy on that. So it's based on that staff are supporting this variance request.
Thank you.
Thank you. So, do we have a mover for the motion on the staff recommendation?
So moved.
So moved. Seconder?
Thank you, Worship. Can we make an amendment to it now? Is that possible?
Yes.
Actually, I would like to amend that we add 7 parking stalls. So we would expect us to 73 total with a ratio of 1.46.
Okay. Thank you. Now so we're going to do something a little bit different tonight. Rather than amend the motion, we're going to go with council consent.
I don't know whether I caught that there was a seconder on the original motion, so the motion on the floor could just be stated as presented by Councillor Hong.
Thank you.
Thank you, Your Worship.
Councillor Hong, you finished? Councillor Bestwick, did you want to add something?
Yes, I would just like, further to Mr. Lindsay was speaking to the 1.2 ratio for Terminal Avenue and 1.06 for Summerhill Place. The number of units are 121 and 103 respectively. The number of stalls are greater than the number of units, obviously, which is not the case in the property that we're...
Yeah, we're 50 to 80.
So,
1.32.
So we're 1.32 without visitor parking.
So in all of these cases, the ratio that we talk about includes visitor parking. Under our bylaw that we have today, 1.66, it's 1.66 stalls. That's how we calculate the overall parking requirement. And then there's a requirement that a portion of those get designated as visitor parking stalls. So there's not a requirement for additional visitor on top of the 1.66. So if we varied the parking as proposed in the bylaw to the 1.32, that would include visitor parking space that would have to be designated on site.
And do we know what that number would look like?
For a project of this scale, it would be approximately two visitor stalls.
Okay. Thank you. Hope it wasn't out of order.
Thank you. Councillor Brennan.
I'm quite happy to support this motion with the increase of 7 stalls. I think that this kind of rental housing is attractive to people who, one, probably don't have more than one vehicle, and also I think attractive to people with no vehicles, because there's adequate busing. That's our policy, right, is to have this kind of housing near, like Mr. Lindsay said, near the those hubs. So it makes sense. This is where we should be doing it. I understand the neighborhood's concerns, and I think we've addressed those. In fact, I think we've addressed it to the first speaker's request, was 6 or 7. We've amended this to 7. I really like the other stuff about this. I like the micro units. I like the thoughtfulness of the high ceilings in the upper floors to make the micro units seem bigger. There's just all sorts of really interesting things about this project that I want to support, and I think by adding the 6 or 7 spaces that we can do that. And I also think that the developer has a point. He's waited six months. I think we have done a lot of work in this city to try to move things along, make them faster, and to take this back to negotiate 6 or 7 parking spaces when we can already agree on those. I don't think makes a lot of sense in terms of advertising that we are a city that's open for business. So happy to do this.
But you need to note that the motion that's on the floor does increase the number of required spaces.
Exactly, but it increases them by the requested number by the first neighborhood delegation. They said 6 or 7. This adds that many.
Thank you. Thank you.
Right?
So I'm going to go on to the question here, but I just wanted to say that I'm having trouble supporting an increase by this amount. We clearly see on 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 examples given on page 102 of similar developments. This one here now is at 1.32. It's the second highest of them. When you look at the utilizations, the 1.39 has a utilization of 1.2. And we have to bear in mind that when we ask for increasingly higher demands on these properties and on these developments, that every single parking space costs money. Every single parking space increases the cost of the project. Every single parking space will increase the rent required in this development, even though it may or may not be used. We're asking for 1.46, which will bring it to the highest. And when we look at some of these ones, 1.39 for Madrona Green, and it has an actual utilization of 1.2. 1.31 for Country Club has an actual utilization of 1.098. We are now demanding of this developer 1.46. I'm having some trouble with that. Call a question. All those in favor of the motion? Opposed? Councillors Pratt, Kip, Bestwick, and McKay, Mayor McKay. So, motion carries. Thank you. Next item, development permit number DP 922 at 20 Barsby Avenue. Purpose is to obtain council authorization to renew the development permit for a 58-unit multifamily residential development.
Move staff recommendation with the following variances. Water course setback to 10 meters. Relax required front yard setback from 0.
Doing it as
And
two-phase
increase
project.
maximum lot building height
They'll bring it down to one. They have lots of
16.5
spaces.
meters.
But they don't want. It's a two-phase project.
Seconder.
That's why.
Councillor Hong is seconder. Questions? Councillor Hong?
No, that was for the last one, sorry.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Bestwick.
Thank you. This was originally brought before us in 2007. Have we provided this renewal prior, or is this the first time we've granted a renewal?
Your Worship, I believe this is the fourth time. So keep in mind, development permits are good for 2 years, so they need to be renewed every 2 years. So they would have been renewed every 2 years from 2007 on.
Do we have any indication that the developer has any intent to build, to proceed?
Your Worship, no more than I had in 2007, no.
So what happens if we do not provide this renewal option?
Well, first of all, council, in order to deny the development permit, would have to find a reason that they believe the development permit doesn't comply with the guidelines, or find that you're not in support of a variance that's requested. In the staff's opinion, the development does comply with your current guidelines. They haven't changed since 2007. But if council denied it, then the applicant would have to resubmit a revised application.
The riparian setback hasn't changed since its original applicant?
That's correct.
application?
Your Worship, all of the variances are exactly as was proposed in 2007.
All the variances are, but has anything changed with the riparian requirements from the province?
Sorry, Your Worship, I misunderstood the question.
That was the question.
Yes, they have. Sorry
They
about
have
that.
changed.
They have changed. So what we've done differently this time is because we have new regulations both from the province and the council's amended their development permit requirements around water courses, that in this renewal they actually had what's called a qualified environmental professional who did the assessment under the riparian area regulations, and their recommendation, which is attached here in a summary, is that they support the variance that was identified in 2007. They support the compensation that's being proposed in terms of park dedication, and they support the removal of invasive species in the remaining riparian area.
Thank you. So I just wanted to confirm that the RAR has changed since its original application.
That's correct, yes.
Thank you.
Councillor Fuller.
Yeah, that was actually the question I was going to ask, so I don't.
Seeing no further speakers, call a question. All those in favor of the motion that's on the floor? Opposed? Carried. Next item, excuse me. Development Variance Permit, DVP 253 at 135 Nickel Street. And the purpose is to obtain council authorization to vary the parking requirement for restaurant use. It's requested that council hear anyone wishing to speak with respect to DVP 253. Is there anyone wishing to speak to DVP 253? Seeing none.
Move the recommendation.
Move the recommendation. Seconded. Discussion. Seeing none. Call a question. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Development Variance Permit DVP 254 at 5905 Metro Drive. The purpose is to obtain council authorization to permit lot depth variances on 8 lots in order to facilitate the subdivision of the lands. It's requested that council hear anyone wishing to speak with respect to DVP 254. Is there anyone who wishes to speak to DVP 254? Seeing none, can I have someone move the motion, move the recommendation, please? So moved. Councillor Hogg. Seconded. Thank you. Discussion. Councillor Bestwick.
Thank you. 8 lots on this site will provide enough room for parking. For 8 units, obviously, on street and otherwise. I've visited a couple of previously approved 9-unit developments or 6 on extremely small sites that are having extremely challenging parking issues. Parking seems to be a considerable issue on many of our items tonight.
So, Your Worship, the way I would answer that is when each of these properties, each of these proposed lots come forward for building permits, they'd be required to demonstrate how they meet the parking bylaw. In this case, for single-family homes, the minimum is 2. If it's a single-family home with a suite, you have to have an additional parking stall. So their plan would have to show how those are being accommodated on their property. I guess my comment would be there's always going to be some element of that where people just choose to park on the street and not in the driveway or in the garage for whatever reason, but we do make sure the bylaw requirement is met.
Yep.
So, seeing... Motion's been moved, seconded. Thank you. Call a question. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Development Variance Permit, DVP 255 at 5473 Mildmay Road. Purpose is to obtain council authorization to further increase the fence retaining wall height, variance previously approved by council on 2014, September 08. It's requested that council hear anyone wishing to speak with respect to DVP 255. Is there anyone wishing to speak to DVP 255? Seeing none, can I have someone move the staff recommendation? Councillor Brennan, seconded by Councillor Bestwick. All right, discussion? Seeing none, call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Thank you. Rezoning application number RA 329 at 4951 Denford Place.
Move the council abandon zoning amendment bylaw 2014 over 4500.060.
Seconder? Seconded? Discussion. See, Councillor Bestwick.
Thank you. So could I just have clarification, please, from staff on what to rezone part of the subject property from R6 to R10 in order to facilitate the subdivision? So how many, when we talk subdivision, how many units, please?
Your Worship, sorry, I don't have the number in front of me, but the basic principle was at the time the applicant was looking at rezoning from a multifamily townhouse zone to steep slope simply because it allowed for single-family lots to be included as part of the project. They've now since decided that they don't want to proceed with that application, that they want to retain the existing zoning. So they've advised us that they're closing the application. The reason we're here this evening is because the bylaws received first and second reading from council. So unless we abandon it, the bylaw continues to be there. So we're seeking council's direction just to simply abandon that bylaw that did receive first and second reading.
And so a public hearing was not held. So the owner doesn't want to continue with the application. What do they want to continue with?
So they're looking at options under the existing townhouse zoning for that site.
Which would mean a subdivision?
Well, it would most likely under the existing townhouse zone mean a multifamily project, like a townhouse project that would be stratified at the time of building, but no subdivision in terms of creating separate legal properties.
Thank you.
Thank you. Seeing no further speakers, I call a question. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Next item, road closure for a portion of Albion Street adjacent to 456 Bruce Avenue. Staff recommendation is on page 152. It's to authorize the disposition and sale of the portion of Albion Street adjacent to 456 Bruce Avenue for the sum of $110,000. Direct the mayor and corporate officer to execute the conditional road closure purchase and sale agreement, and 3, to direct staff to proceed with public notice for the closure of the portion of Albion Street adjacent to 456 Bruce Avenue. Do I have a mover for the motion? The recommendation, pardon me. Councillor Pratt, seconder. Councillor Brennan. 1 and 2. Seeing no speakers, call a question. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Next item. Bylaw is motion that that road closure and dedication removal for the portion of Albion Street, 456 Bruce Avenue, number 2015, number 7211, pass first reading. Moved, seconded. All those in favor? Opposed? Wish to speak to it? Bylaw concerning road closure. Okay, all those in favor? Opposed? Carried.
Move the road closure and dedication removal of a portion of Albion Street adjacent to 456 Bruce Avenue, bylaw 2015, number 7211, pass second reading.
Pass second reading. Seconder? All speakers? No speakers? All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Next item. Georgia Park improvements associated with Hilton Hotel project, to be introduced by Mr. Dale Lindsay, Director of Community Development.
Thank you, Your Worship. I know it's been a late evening already, so I won't take much of your time, but I have a couple of slides here, and I just wanted to introduce the next item on your agenda, which, as you mentioned, is with respect to the improvements in Georgia Park. I know it's, for some council members, it may be hard to see on the presentation screen, so I did put a hard copy of the presentation in front of council members if you want to follow along that way. The first slide is a slide that I showed you when I was talking to you about this project last summer. I think in August we were here as part of the rezoning application. And at that time, staff recommended basically 4 things: that council consider rezoning of the parent property to allow for the Hilton Hotel. That's since that time went through, that bylaw has been adopted, so the hotel is permitted. The second was to secure an actual pedestrian right-of-way that allowed people to move from Front Street through the building, through the lobby, down to the promenade below. The third, there was a community contribution component of a $1.2 million monetary contribution towards the park improvements. And at this time, I should mention, those are the areas sort of outside of that red polygon in the park area itself. And what I have shown here tonight is simply a concept drawing. That those park improvements are still going through the Parks and Rec Committee, and they'll be going through public process this spring and ultimately back to council. So that's just a concept that's shown there. But the developer did propose $1.2 million towards whatever park improvements council decided upon in Georgia Park. The fourth thing that was recommended on that evening is support in principle by council for a lease of a portion of Georgia Park. And the lease was required for really 2 things. And you can see on the bottom of this drawing, it shows a loading bay. The applicants were proposing to drive in off Front Street onto this into this area and then back into the loading bay on their property on the north side of their building. The second, they were proposing some seating associated with a restaurant, again on the north side of the building. And those 2 uses are what we would call non-park uses, and they're exclusively for the use of the applicant. So that lease, although it would have resulted in a yearly rent to the city, it would have required the approval of the electorate to enter into this, and it would have required, as you know, it would have required a referendum or alternative approval process to proceed. Since that time, the next slide I want to show you is what the applicants have revised their proposal. They've eliminated the need for the loading bay and using that portion of Georgia Park, and they're removing the area that they were proposing for seating associated with the restaurant on the north side of the hotel. The new loading bay access is now going to come in directly off of Front Street, and the turnaround movements will be accommodated within their revised building design. As a result, there's no longer a need for a lease. There's no non-park uses that are being proposed. And instead, we're recommending a deal where the existing right-of-way agreement that I mentioned earlier, which allows for pedestrians to access through the building, be amended to secure public park improvements between the hotel and the existing promenade. So this would be the area that's outlined in yellow here, which is primarily a walkway with a grand staircase that connects people down to the waterfront and from the waterfront back up to the hotel. Again, what's shown here is simply a concept for what would happen outside of those improvements. And the way that the improvements have been designed is they can fit with the existing park, if you can picture the existing promenade down there, or they could potentially fit with a revised park plan that's, as I mentioned, under review right now. So the end result is those works have an estimated value of about $1.5 million. So instead of moving from a lease, we're moving to what I would describe as a combined package of $2.7 million of improvements in the park, 1.5 for the actual works outlined here under the yellow, and that 1.2 that I mentioned earlier for park improvements which are yet to be determined. I just have a couple more images that sort of show like those exact same polygons on a perspective drawing of the front of the hotel. Again, this is the original intended lease area, and you can see up at the top right corner is the area where the loading bay was originally proposed. This is that same image with the reduced area that's no longer a lease, outlining the improvements that the hotel would be required to construct at the time of the building permit. And Your Worship, last are just a couple of renderings I had that Council may be more familiar with that just show the show the hotel within the context of a concept of the park improvements. And unless there's any questions, that's the end of my introduction.
Councillor Fuller.
Yeah, we received a letter from Frank Murphy earlier today that has a number of questions that he had hoped we would be able to answer by the time of the meeting. Have you had a chance to review those questions?
I'm not sure I was forwarded that
You may not have
email,
been
but
at
if you
those-
want to
yeah, it was
try
on-
me on, I could.
Okay. Well, I can run through them. It shouldn't take long. Okay, so he says he has some remaining concerns, and that, of course, we would figure that would be happening, but details of the existing statutory right-of-way and clear explanation of what existing statutory right-of-way agreement requiring public access from Front Street through the hotel to the waterfront walkway will be modified to reflect park improvements. What does that actually mean?
Okay. So as I was mentioning early on, Council gave us direction as a condition of rezoning is to secure a right-of-way for allowing people on Front Street to go through the hotel. In this case, if you can picture, there's quite a great difference between Front Street and the promenade. So to allow them to go through the hotel, access the stairwell of the elevators, and come down and exit out at the level of the promenade. So it just gives that accessibility issue through the property. The improvements we're now talking about are the improvements outlined in yellow here, which really give the ability for that pedestrian, once they found their way to the north, I guess this would be the east side of the hotel, to then find their way from the edge of the hotel down onto the walkway itself.
Okay. His next question, City Parks, Recreation, Environmental and Environment Department, quote, has worked with the proponents to develop a park plan for Georgia Park that supports redevelopment of the park, improves public access, and integrates the park with the new hotel while ensuring Georgia Park remains public space, end quote. His question, that sounds good, but should that report not be presented for a council and public determination of whether or not it accomplished those admirable goals? We're asked to take their word for it. That's poor public policy and unacceptable. A full public process is needed to get these decisions out in the light of day.
Go ahead.
Your Worship, sorry,
That's a good one.
I did mention early on that the concept that's showing here is simply a concept, and the Parks Department is going through a public process this year, and they'll be taking forward a concept plan to the Parks and Rec Commission. And included in that will be a public process for people to review the concepts and provide comments.
Okay, and his last thing was with regards to the creation of a public plaza, stairway, and water feature within the park. The exact improvements will be determined through the development permit stage. Pre-working with the proponent isn't nearly good enough, IMO. Is that still going to be going on, that water feature and the rest? He says it isn't nearly good enough. Should go out to an open design competition, open to landscape architects, park designers, and the general public. So I'm assuming he means that large chunk that leads right down to the walkway, because I believe that's where the water feature had been planned.
I'm not sure I fully understand the question,
They had
but
an infinity pool design in that yellow area where the restaurant will look over top of it to the ocean.
that's correct. As Councillor Kipp mentioned, there's a walkway that's immediately in front of the building that would allow pedestrians to move back and forth. Then there's a water feature that you would have to cross as you make your way down the staircase. The comment in the staff report is these are concept drawings, obviously, and that the detailed design of those improvements would be done at the building permit stage and secured.
And would the public have some input on that?
We're not anticipating that those improvements are a public process, because of course they could proceed, depending on decisions council makes about the other park improvements. These could proceed before those decisions are made. Ideally, we would like to see these improvements done at the same time that all the works are done, just for efficiency's sake, being done in the entire park. But that's a future decision of council.
Yeah, well, thank you kindly for that, and hopefully Mr. Murphy is going to watch the video of this if he's not watching it on TV right now.
Thank you. Councillor Yocum.
Thank you, Your Worship. Mr. Lindsay, in regards to your the staff recommendation here, just for my clarity, is to rescind the approval in principle to lease portion of Georgia Park. So I don't know what that agreement approval or that principal lease was, but nevertheless, if the old one was in favor of the left side, that red on the loading bay,
yes,
which that would eliminate that portion, which I had problems from the beginning from my one spot here. So that would eliminate that, which is great. Secondly, is that accurate? Sorry,
that is
okay.
Yes.
Thank you. And my second piece there would be the park amendment in the front of the proposed hotel. Would that property still remain city property?
Through Your Worship to Councillor Yocum, yes, that's correct. That would remain City Park.
Great, thank you.
Councillor Thorpe.
Thank you, Your Worship. To me, this is really good news. And this proposed lease, I think, was a very contentious issue during the election. And I'm really pleased that if we do, we now have the opportunity to rescind this proposed lease, and it works that the city maintains control of the park. We get improvements made to the park. We get maintained access to the waterfront for our citizens. It seems like a win-win to me. And just to further respond to Councillor Fuller's questions earlier, yes, Parks and Recreation is working on a long-term improvement plan for Maffeo Sutton Park, which would include the area of Georgia Avenue Park. Georgia Park, sorry. Thank you.
Thank you. I should have followed Councillor Brennan's constant cues to have had a motion on the floor before we debated. Would you care to?
Approval in principle to lease a portion of Georgia Park to support the Hilton Hotel project and direct staff to amend the existing statutory right-of-way agreement at 10 Front Street to secure improvements to Georgia Park from Insight Holdings Ltd. as outlined in the report.
I think Councillor Thorpe beat you to it. First, it's moved and seconded. And Councillor Yocum.
Thank you, Worship. Just quickly on the second piece, direct staff to amend the existing statutory right-of-way agreement in 10 Front Street. So that's that piece on the left again, to amend that, take that out? Is that what that refers to, Mr. Lindsay?
I'm sorry, I didn't hear your question.
The second piece, the second part of motion, number 2, is that to eliminate the left side?
No, I would describe it more generally that the first motion eliminates the left-hand side.
Okay, yeah.
The second motion directs staff to amend the existing right-of-way that I was mentioning allows for pedestrians to go through the hotel. So it's that right-of-way agreement that we would amend to include the condition that these works are constructed.
Thank you. Just for clarity.
Thank you. Councillor Brennan, you still, go ahead.
Yeah, I just want to congratulate our staff and the developer for taking what was clearly the community's interest here and making this this new agreement that really satisfies the issues that the community had around leasing out our park, and I think you did a really good job of that, and I want to thank you for doing that, and I want to thank the developer for being open to that change. It's great.
Thank you. Councillor Fuller.
Yeah, I like this. It's great, but I do have one more question. The $1.5 million towards the creation of the public plaza. It looks to me like we don't get this until the hotel starts to build, and they want to do those improvements at the same time. So there's no guarantee that that hotel is going to be built. So there would be no guarantee we'll get that $1.5 million.
Your Worship, as per Council's policy, this is a negotiated amenity contribution as part of the rezoning, and no, yes, you're correct. Unless the development proceeds, you would not, the community would not receive the benefit.
Thanks. Councillor Pratt.
Thank you. I'd just like to say also how pleased I am that this has come back to council in this form, and that the developers did hear the concerns of the community, and so I really do see this as a win-win situation, and I just wanted to say how pleased I am that they have done this. And I really do hope this development goes ahead. I think it'll be a huge improvement to our waterfront. I think there's lots of things about it that are really going to just make that piece of land, which is a bit of an eyesore right now, into something a little more beautiful. So thank you.
Thank you. Seeing no further speakers, I call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Next item. Structural removal order for 2023 Kelsey Road. The purpose is to obtain council authorization to enforce the City of Nanaimo's building bylaw 2003 number 5693 for works constructed without a building permit and considered to be unsafe. It's requested that council hear anyone wishing to speak with respect to structural removal at 2023 Kelsey Road. Seeing none, can I get a mover for the staff recommendation, please? Councillor Pratt? Seconder. Councillor Thorpe, thank you. Got a first and a mover and a seconder. Discussion, Councillor Beswick.
Thank you. To staff, was this driveway constructed by the current owner or the original owner of 2023?
I'm sorry, Your Worship, I'm not sure if it was the existing owner or the previous owner. I'd have to report back to council on that.
So the person that owns 2023 now, so if they purchased the house, that we're asking them to remove this hazard or reinforce it or upgrade it or whatever. So if they purchased the place with this already in, is there any leniency for that circumstance?
Your Worship, in your staff's opinion, that the situation represents an unsafe condition and the ownership of the property, in our mind, was not a factor in making that determination. We believe that it needs to be repaired or removed to protect public safety.
Thank you. And so they have how long in which to, upon receiving this notice, how long do they have to fix the problem?
They have 30 days under the order, Your Worship.
30 days. Do you think 30 days is reasonable?
Your Worship, of course, this isn't just the start of this file. We've been attempting to get a building permit in. We've been to council previously with the notice on title, trying to encourage this issue to be resolved. And unfortunately, we've had to come to the situation where we need to use this section of the community charter in order to get this dealt with. So we believe it is an appropriate first step to request them to proceed. If it's a removal, yes, I believe it could be done in 30 days. I believe if they're going to re-engineer something and construct something different, it would likely take longer than that. But our concern right now is just to simply have the issue resolved.
So inspection was completed and stop work order posted February 3rd, 2015. So a month and a half ago. So were they constructing it a month and a half ago?
My understanding was they were in the middle of construction when we posted the stop work order, yes.
Okay, so, and did they stop work on it?
The wall, I believe, was substantially, as in the condition shown in the photos at the time that the stop work order was posted, so I don't believe they've done any significant changes to it since that time.
Thank you.
Seeing no further speakers, call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Councillor Bestwick opposed. Next item, Section 72, 73, 74 of the Community Charter, 16 Needham Street. It's requested that Council hear anyone wishing to speak with respect to 16 Needham Street. Is there anyone wishing to speak to 16 Needham Street? Seeing none, do I have someone that could move the motion, please, the staff recommendation? So moved. Seconded? Seeing no speakers, I call the question.
Hang on.
Oh, Councillor Fuller.
Yeah, just wanted some clarification. Says the property contains a derelict shed. The shed is open and being used by squatters. Then it goes on to say Section 74 of the Community Charter may declare a nuisance property, blah, blah, blah. Is the removal for the house itself or just the shed or both? I know the house well. It's just up the road from me. I can see it looking at my back door.
Well, I don't know if it's Randy's.
Mr. Seward.
Your Worship, I believe it's just for the shed itself, but I'll confirm that for you tomorrow. There's clearly a concern about a safety issue here, and that's why we have it before you.
So I guess a follow-up would be if you don't know whether it's the house or the shed and you can't confirm it till tomorrow, how can we pass the motion that's been made?
Your Worship, what we do in this case is it's still, if Council directs us to carry through with this, is we're going to move ahead with trying to resolve this with the owner to demolish the problematic building. We certainly wouldn't be demolishing anything that's not problematic in that case.
Yep. No further questions? Councillor Yocum.
Yeah, I'd just like to echo Councillor Fuller's words. With respect, Mr. Seward, the comment just made of any other some problematic buildings. Problematic. I don't know exactly the exact word you stated. I'm not here to challenge. I just want to be for my comfort. If the motion could say if it's the shed.
Yes, Your Worship. The report clearly identifies. I just read it as the shed, so it is just the shed.
Thank you.
Thank you. So, call a question. All those in favor? Opposed? Seeing none, carried. Thank you. Next item, unresolved building deficiencies bylaw contravention notices. It's requested that Council hear anyone wishing to speak with respect to unresolved building deficiencies for the properties listed below. First one being 155 Acacia Avenue. Is there anyone that wishes to speak to 155 Acacia Avenue? Next one, 2641 Labio Road. Anyone wishing to speak to 2641 Labio Road? Next one, 927 Sarum Rise Way. Anyone wishing to speak to 927 Sarum Rise Way? And finally, number 6 Treasure Trail. Anyone wishing to speak to number 6 Treasure Trail? Seeing none, can we have a mover for the motion, please? Garner Crescent has been removed. Yep. Councillor Hong's moved the motion. Do we have a seconder? Councillor Fuller? Thank you. I call the question. All those in favor? Opposed? Seeing none? Carried. Next item. Proposed changes to the cultural funding programs, and this is to be introduced to Nanaimo Culture and Heritage Commission Chair, Councillor Brennan.
In 2013, Council requested that a review of the city's cultural funding programs be undertaken as part of the cultural planning process. The purpose of the review was to ensure that funding programs reflected strategic investment by the city based on clear and consistent criteria that aligned with the city's corporate strategic plan and the cultural plan for a creative Nanaimo. So the recommendations for proposed changes provide a clearer definition to the purpose and objectives of the funding program and better help to articulate the benefits and overall value of the city's investment to the public. I would move the recommendation that Council approve the proposed changes to the City of Nanaimo's current cultural funding programs outlined in the report.
Do we have a seconder? Seconded by Councillor Pratt. Discussion. Councillor Fuller.
I'm just curious as to whether there's an appeal process for the grants. I can't find it in the report, but so I'm curious as to whether there's an appeal process.
Well, Your Worship, I would assume council is the appeal for any of the disputes.
Mayor McKay, in answer to Councillor Fuller's question, yeah, it goes through the Culture and Heritage Commission, then the recommendations to council, so the appeal could be made at council.
So is there any way that that could be put into the report? I mean, it seems relatively simple to me that people know there is an appeal process.
Mayor McKay, it isn't a formal appeal process, but they can be a delegation to council.
So as per the way it's done right now, this is just some minor changes to the process, and the committee only recommends to council. Correct. Council then makes gives final approval. So the appeal would then be done by council or through council.
Your Worship, it's certainly implicit in that, in the way you described it. If it helps, and if the chair is okay, we could insert some language in that would help that.
I think that would be reasonable to do that, although I agree it is implicit that council is the final arbiter of all of these decisions, so it kind of would be, but it's fair enough that it is the truth. Council is the final arbiter. No reason why we shouldn't say so.
So if I could, for clarification, how can we have an appeal to a recommendation? So when the recommendations come forward, they would come to council. The person who, or the group that may wish to appeal the recommendations, they can surely come forward as a delegation, can they not?
Your Worship, I think we're all saying the same thing, and that's just what we want to spell out in the process, that's what happens, and that's your option if you're not satisfied with the recommendation of the committee.
Thank you. Councillor Hong.
Thank you, Your Worship. Just a couple of questions there on page 176. Part B says operating funding is directed to organizations that have a year-long public seasonal programming and have been in operation for a minimum of 3 years and can show evidence of support from other sources. But in the next point, it says 3-year operating fund is available for established nonprofit professional organizations that have been in existence for 4 years. I'm just a little bit confused with the 3-year and 4-year terminology here. Clarification?
Your Worship, Councillor Hong. Operating funding is presented at a 1-year annual or a 3-year term. The 3-year funding is for professional or larger capacity organizations that need to show that commitment by the city to secure those federal and provincial funds.
Okay, thank you. And then follow up on that, just two questions are we going to put a maximum amount of allowable limit on here and a maximum allowable years allowed? Was that a discussion amongst cultures, you guys?
Your worship, again, to Councillor Hong. Groups cannot apply for more than 25% of their operating budget, so there is that cap set on it. As far as reapplying for future years, if that is the question, that would be a decision for the committee in making those recommendations.
Okay, thank you. Because I just wanted to bring that point up for maximum allowable years, is because I wanted other organizations to have a good chance at getting the money, but not solely on the discretion of the city funding them for the rest of their existence. So, giving, say a bone to the dog to get them started is great. I encourage that, but I don't want to be feeding the dog for the rest of its life. So I applaud these changes. It would just be nice to have some other terms that we know that in a form of terminology where the city is going to say that, we are not going to be funding you for your entire existence is what I would like to see,
Your
or
worship,
something that term.
Your worship, that is fundamentally different than what I see, and if that's the case, that motion should be made to refer it back or to have alternative language, because that's not contained in here, and staff would not be, and the committee, pursuing that unless you made that motion.
Yep. Councillor Yocum.
Thank you, worship. In regards to the appeal process, I think it's paramount that we get a clear picture of it. Not having a clear policy on this is definitely not good governance. It's a simple concept, and if it's not written clear, we have it in all our lives. We have it in other areas. I have it in child welfare. There's appeal process, etc., etc. It's not an uncommon process, so it would be very simple. If person or entity weren't pleased with the decision, or they had a valid or invalid conversation, obviously it'd go between them and whoever leads the staff member that leads this committee. Secondly, it would go, next phase, it would go between them and the committee. And thirdly, it'd go from, if no resolve, then after hearing everyone's rhymes or reasons, and then it would go in front of mayor and council. Just goes straight to mayor and council, totally politicizes it. Then we get told quite often that we don't get involved in the staff stuff or those decisions, or it may interfere with some dynamics around this table unnecessarily. So I think a simple process would be very clear for this and many areas within the city, and also it is better governance, and most of all, it's transparency. Thank you.
Bernie just hit a nerve. Councillor Pratt.
I don't know which one I want to comment on first, but to Councillor Hong's comment about feeding the dog forever, I certainly don't see it that way in terms of these grants. These grants are there so that organizations in our community can, from year to year, do what they need to do to put on cultural events. And so it would not be uncommon at all for us to continue to support certain organizations over and over again. In fact, we tend to do that. And I would hate to see a cap put on anything, because there are a lot of organizations that would not be able to bring the amount of economic benefit to our community that they do now if we didn't support them. And I think that's at all levels. I don't care whether it's a little organization or a much larger one that's capable of attracting funding on provincial and national grants. So I really don't see the need to put any restrictions on who applies or how often they get grants over the years. There are certain organizations in our community that bring incredible benefit culturally to our community, and I think they should be supported from year to year. it's either the hour or my age, I'm not sure which, but I can't remember what the other comment was that I was going to make, so I'll leave it at that for now. Thank you.
Councillor Fuller.
Okay. There's no denying that these organizations benefit the community, huge benefits. But, I wish I had a thought of what Councillor Hong talked about, because it seems to benefit the bigger organizations more so than the smaller ones. And seeing as we've moved and seconded the recommendation, how would we have to defeat that before we make another motion to maybe take it back, look at that, what Councillor Hong talked about, what I talked about with the appeal process, and what Councillor Yoakum supported? How would we do this?
You would, pardon me, you would have to defeat it, yes.
Or could I just simply make a motion to refer?
Yeah. Sorry, Your Worship, if I may interrupt, sorry. Yes, you could do a motion to refer it back, and then what it does is push this motion on pause.
Okay.
And then after that, we bring it back and it's back on the floor.
So I would be willing to make that motion to refer it back. Need a seconder.
And Your Worship, could we just tie to that referral motion, the 2 points that you would like to be reviewed include some sort of cap on continuous funding, and secondly, that the appeal process be clearly laid out?
Yep, that works for me.
Second that.
Yep. Councillor Thorpe.
Thank you, Your Worship. I would support the recommendation as it stands, because...
We have a referral.
Oh, I'm sorry.
So the referral motion is on the floor now.
Right. So, call the question. All those in favor of referral? Opposed? Carried. Councillor Thorpe and Councillor Brennan opposed.
No. And Councillor Pratt.
And Councillor Pratt opposed. Thank you. Motion carries. So it's been referred. Next item.
Move the council receive the information in the report pertaining to commercial vehicle license regulation amendment bylaw.
Seconder? Second? All right. Seeing no speakers, all those in favor, call the question. Opposed? Seeing none, carried.
I move the commercial vehicle license regulation amendment bylaw number 2015, number 7054.01, provide for minor housekeeping items and add Schedule B fine schedule past first reading.
Seconded.
No, first.
All right. Call a question. All those in favor? Opposed?
Move the commercial vehicle licensing regulation amendment bylaw 2015 number 7054.01 pass second reading.
Seconded. Seeing no speakers, all those in favor? Opposed? Carried.
The commercial vehicle licensing regulation amendment bylaw 2015 number 7054.01 pass third reading.
Seconded. No speakers, all those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Next item, property maintenance bylaw 1990, number 3704. It's requested the council hear anyone wishing to speak with respect to property maintenance for the properties listed below. First one, number 16 Needham Street. Anyone wishing to speak with respect to 16 Needham Street? Seeing none. 633 Milton Street. Anyone wishing to speak to 633 Milton Street? Seeing none. 711 Pine Street. Anyone wishing to speak to 711 Pine Street? Seeing none. Next one, 445 Hillcrest Avenue. Anyone wishing to speak to? Yes, sir. Go ahead.
Your Worship, that one's been removed off the agenda. It's been cleaned up.
Hillcrest. Thank you.
So all of the last threes are removed.
Oh, Ed Sterling's gone as well.
That's correct.
Thank you. So, you have the three here. Can I have someone move the staff recommendation, please?
So moved.
So moved. Seconded. Seconded, Councillor Bennett. Councillor Bestwick, pardon me. Call a question. All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Next one, bylaws with no accompanying report. Number A, motion that council adopt item number 2015, number 7060-03. Do we have a motion for adoption? We're on number 10A.
Procedural motion changes.
Can I have a mover, please? Moved. Seconder. Seconded. Thank you. Seeing no speakers, call a question. All those in favor? Opposed? Opposed. Councillor Kipp is opposed. Motion carries. Motion that street entertainments regulation bylaw number 2015-7109.01 be adopted. Do I have a mover? So moved. Seconded. Thank you. Speaker, Councillor Fuller.
I just have a question with regards to this. I wasn't around when, I believe I wasn't around, or I left early when it was moved to take one of the busking sites away and move it to another location. But it actually, in essence, what we've done, if I look at the old one and the new map, is we've actually eliminated one spot, because there was a spot at the corner of Gordon Street and Terminal, I believe it is still, which has just been moved halfway up the block to Commercial Street, whereas the other one that was in front of the just outside of the front here and to the side, which is, yes, in front of a retail space, that one is now gone. So if that's all part of this, then I don't think I can support the bylaw.
Thank you.
Whatever it is.
Seeing no further speakers, I call a question. All those in favor? Opposed? Councillor Fuller opposed. Thank you. Motion carries. Next one, that local government reserve fund transferring bylaw 2015-7205 to transfer funds from the local improvement reserve fund to the general fund asset management reserve fund be adopted. Can I have a mover, please? Councillor Pratt, seconder. Councillor Hong. Thank you. Questions? Seeing none? All those in favor? Opposed? Carried. Next one, that road closure and dedication removal for Tranquil Road, adjacent to 5302 Dewar Road, bylaw number 2015, number 7207, to close Tranquil Road, be adopted. Can I have a mover? So moved. Seconder? Councillor Hong, thank you. Seeing no speakers, call a question. All those in favor? Opposed? Motion carries. Next correspondence. Next item is council appointments. So, appointments to the Nanaimo Economic Development Corporation. At the special in-camera council meeting held 2015, March 16th, council made the following appointments for a 3-year term. Mr. Doug Kalsix, Mr. Dan Kashirka, Adrian Lagan, Dr. Ralph Nielsen, Charlie Parker, and Andre Sullivan, with one new member being Brad Jones. The balance of the board were renewed: A.J. Huston, Stan Brady, Ron Hartman, Ian Howitt, Chief John Wesley, William Anderson, Gloria Hatfield, Signe Madden, Carla Smith, and Kelly Bissell. So that's just basically an announcement or declaration, if I'm correct. No action required. So, last item. Question period. Oh, Mr.
Yes,
Councillor Yorkham.
yeah, sorry for the last second push. Are we going to be meeting with the NEDC board soon? Because the deficit did run as a concern, and I'm sure we're probably overdue to meet with them. So is there going to be a meeting in the near future just to discuss and, you know, get on the same page and see what's going on?
I'm not sure if a meeting has been scheduled. I can't recall. Help me out, Mr. Sweetie.
Your Worship, we have been talking about trying to find a date when we can get together with at least the board and the CEO, and we can pursue a similar meeting of a joint council to board meeting if that's council's desire.
Thank you. Councillor Brennan.
I just, this is the second time that we've heard this tonight at council, that the NEDC had run a deficit. And I just want to be clear that that is not what happened. They reported out at their AGM that they had a surplus from last year. And so they took the surplus and reinvested that into the community rather. So that's an entirely different thing than the NADC running a deficit. That's not what happened. And I just wanted, I think that it's only fair. There were several of us at the AGM, heard the reporting out from the president or the chair, I'm not sure what they call it, and the executive director. And I thought it only fair that we corrected that impression that they had run a deficit. In fact, they had not. There was a year when there was an accumulation of funds because there had been a period of time when they didn't have an executive director. And so those funds were invested into the community at the first opportunity, as is their direction from this council.
Thank you, Councillor Brennan. Councillor Kep.
You know, I guess it's an impression of how that, because I was at that same meeting, and what I heard was they went $163,000 over their budget, and so they pulled that from surplus. So their budgeted amount, they actually went over. So for me, I understand that they wanted to put that money back into the community, but it is concerning to me when they set a budget and they go over by, I guess it's not, it's only about 7% over their budget.
Okay. Councillor Pratt.
Thank you. I think the NEDC would have been criticized if they'd kept that money and done nothing with it. They had every intention at the beginning of the year of using that money. And in general accounting, you show a deficit at the end of the year because you don't include that surplus that's there at the beginning of the year in that budget. But that was their intention. They made that very clear at their AGM that it was their intention and that the deficit was intended to use up the surplus at the beginning of the year. That is standard. And I am shocked. I am shocked at the media attention that this has gotten, and that somehow it would infer that the NEDC has done something incorrect when they have not. And I'd just like to make that clear.
Thank you. Councillor Brennan.
And I also think that it was the spending of a surplus. Certainly the city spends their surplus in a variety of different ways, and we never characterize it as a deficit. We characterize it as having accumulated a surplus and having expended it in certain ways. So what's good for the goose is good for the gander, and unless you're going to go out there in the world, unless this council's going to go out in the world and say we had a deficit of, say, $7 million because we purchased the Lindley Valley out of our reserves, be my guest, but that would be incorrect to do that.
Thank you. Councillor Kip.
Well, from an accounting practice that I understand on that is we don't spend our surplus. I've tried to spend it on tax reduction. I've tried to spend it, but it goes into reserves for the next year, and that's quite so. But it doesn't mean just because there is reserves that you have to spend them. So that, to me, to say that, well, that's standard practice, just spend the money we didn't spend last year, that to me is it's not the way I would say that if they had that plan in there, if it's in their agendas, if it's in their minutes, it says we're going to take this money from the beginning of the year, but at the beginning of last year, I only heard the budget was 1.5 million. I didn't hear that they were going to spend the surplus. I never heard that anywhere in any information I got. So they decided to spend it. I don't know how. I don't know if it's in their minutes. I don't know if it's in their agendas that they said they were going to spend it. So I think it's just a political issue that they put out in the paper that they spent more than their budget. And that's simple to me.
Thank you. Councillor Bestwick.
Thank you. I think going back to Councillor Yoakum's request that we meet with the NEDC, which is something that the previous council requested or asked that we do following a report that was done. And the vote was 9-0 for council to meet with the NEDC's board and senior representatives, which has not taken place to this point in time. So I think it's important that we do meet as one of our at arm's length corporations that we fund with approximately 90% of their operating budget. And upon review of the NEDC budget, you would see that there was approximately $130,000+ expended in the year on a third party, or a square, it's referred to as square one, with the anticipation and expectation that there would be an equal amount of revenues brought in that year ending. And it brought in about $13,000 and not the $130,000+ that they thought. So therein lies where that money that was spent was a loss, if you will. They spent surplus money that they had, surplus money from the first year of approximately $500,000, and then it went down to somewhere in the neighborhood of $280,000 to $300,000. And then there was the initiative to work with the Square One incubator program on Commercial Street.
I'm going to have to call a point of order here. This has gone way off topic. This item was to announce the appointments to the board.
I'm just trying to, I think practically every member of council here has had their opportunity to express what they felt the NEDC regular, normal accounting practices, where money was spent or not spent.
I would like to reiterate that I believe that this conversation has just gone on way too far off course. It was to announce the appointments.
Well, you could have done
to the
that
board.
3 speakers or 4 speakers ago.
Thank you. Next item, question period.
I had a question for that item. And it
With respect to the appointments to the board?
Well, with respect to the fact that there was a motion put on the table that went 9-0 to meet with the NEDC board that was never acted upon. That
Councillor Fuller, we're talking about the
play.
appointments to the board.
That motion
the
is
point
still
has been
in
made.
play.
Thank you. Question period. Please.
My name is Fred Taylor of 204 Emery Way. I listened to the mayor inviting himself to a boat ride with the RCMP, a ride along. Mr. Mayor, what about with the bike squad?
I'm in, baby.
Well, you're creating
long
new
as it's an
bicycle
e-bike.
lanes and everything else, and it's helping out a lot in our community. So
Certainly, Mr.
we
Taylor.
could get the next found bicycle where there's a double seat, etc. We could hang on to it and take a member of council at a time for a ride along to know that part of our community.
Thank you.
The inspector spoke of marine activities, provincial funding. I believe most of our harbor is federal. What are we doing about getting some federal money to help?
I'm not aware of any initiatives. Mr.
Well,
Mr.
he
Swaby,
spoke of
Just a
getting-
moment, sir. Just a moment. Can you answer that, Mr. Swaby? Do we have any initiatives to see about getting any federal money to support this program?
Sorry, Your Worship, I missed which program.
Oh, the Marine Police.
Your worship, I would have to check into that. I'm not
Well,
clear
the
on whether
inspector
we do or
spoke
we don't.
of provincial, and yet it's a federal harbor. What's in front of us is federal. Provincial is just a little bit down Newcastle Channel and out the other side of Jack's Point.
I don't believe
Basically,
we are.
it's
Your worship.
90% federal. Somebody should be going after the federal government to want some too if they can get it out of the provincial to help
I
policing
think
costs.
the federal funds are certainly expended in other ways, but I don't believe in the RCMP in that respect.
Well, there seems to be an avenue opened up. If one government will give it to us, why not the other? The other thing that's disappeared apparently from this community is community police stations, which work into neighborhoods, etc. We have no more.
What about Oliver Woods?
There is none. No, I've been told by the RCMP we don't have any left.
I see police vehicles there. I see
Yeah,
policemen up
for
there.
their use, their own use, but it's not a community police station apparently anymore. And it was a very good tool to work with into the community, started by Victoria in Canada, RCMP in Nanaimo first station at Woodgrove Shopping Center. And it's something that I can't understand why, if we're not lacking some funding or whatever, why it's not being used as a tool now.
Your worship, I believe Mr. Taylor hit the nail on the head. If we weren't lacking funding, we would likely have them in many places.
Well, we could use some money out of the reserve account, sir. Instead of keep putting it in there, piling it in there. And I see all the time before the council problems with residential properties, unsightly, etc. When are we going to address some commercial, industrial properties in this community? And why not?
Your worship, Mr. Taylor has brought this up before, and we do respond to those complaints. I think the difference is that the neighborhood establishes the standard by which they would make a complaint about residential unsightliness, and the standard of an industrial property or a commercial property is completely different. And to my knowledge, there's been none brought forward by people with those complaints that we've brought to council.
Well, there's several, and I'm aware of. And when our tourists, etc., can go to Duke Point Ferry and look at roads alongside the Duke Point Highway with old machinery and trees 10 years or more growing up through the machinery, wouldn't we have a little bit of pride in wanting to remove that stuff? Thank you.
Robert Fuller, 3350 Hammond Bay Road. This has to go part and parcel with what I spoke about earlier and what's been discussed just recently about the NEDC. At one time, there was a board or committee that met. I remember going to it at least 3 years ago, and it was chaired by our previous mayor, Mr. Rattan. I believe it might have been called the Progress Board. It had a number of members from the community, and one of the goals was to oversee the NEDC and to discuss parameters to judge the success, the fiscal responsibility. Does that committee or board exist anymore? Has it been struck down? Could anyone answer that? I've asked this question. I asked it of the previous administration, and nobody seemed to know. And surely this is standard practice to have somebody overseeing the amount of money that goes into an arm's length corporation funded by the taxpayers of this city.
Do you want? What's happened to the progress board?
I don't know. I'm asking.
Your worship, it was dissolved.
Yeah, it was dissolved. It was dissolved, sir.
Pardon me?
It was dissolved.
It's totally dissolved. So now, in essence, we have nobody overseeing.
Your worship, the Progress Nanaimo board, to my recollection, and I could be wrong, and was not to have oversight on fiscal responsibility. It was to set goals and targets about the economy, is my recollection, that the Economic Development Board could then set its goals and objectives on. But I could be wrong. That's my recollection.
I was at that first meeting. Mr. Wally Wells, outside of the meeting, after it was determined that we were going to wait until Mr. Angus took over to find out the parameters involved, asked that question. I thought why we were there was to discuss parameters regarding NEDC.
I think I'm agreeing with you that the parameters related to economic development.
It had to do.
This question period, and if there is a discussion to be held, our staff and councillors are happy to meet with people and have discussions, but this is question period.
Great, thank you. Anybody?
Why is there no fiscal oversight of this arm's length corporation?
Sir, we have a board of volunteers, which are some of the brightest business minds in all of Nanaimo, that are on that board. One of the reasons why it is arm's length is so that we will not interfere with their business. As you can see, did you attend their AGM?
No, I didn't, because I have children in school. Quite often they have activities. I can't go to everything.
Okay. Did you ask any questions of any of the councillors to take to the AGM on your behalf?
No, I didn't. But that still doesn't answer my question. Why is there no accountability here? I'm not saying that the organization is bad in any way. I think it's a good idea. Do I think it should be funded by the taxpayer? Probably not. I'm just wondering about the accountability and the fiscal responsibility. I realize these are bright minds, but surely, as in any organization, in any corporation, you have an outside party looking in. It's standard practice.
Your worship, council is accountable for the actions of the NEDC, and council is always able to, through its negotiated contract with NEDC, determine whether you're not satisfied with the way that they provide their accountability. Council hasn't done that to date. The renewal of their contract's coming up. And if council wishes to make changes to how the NEDC reports out, or the amount of funding that's provided, or is not satisfied with the service they've delivered, then that's council's purview to look at amending the contract. To date, council has not made any motions to that respect.
Thank you.
Councillor Brennan.
Those were my points.
Thank you. Councillor Kipp.
The NEDC Progress Board was only to complete benchmarks. It was to Nanaimo's performance against cities, to provide strategic advice on ways to improve those performances on surrounding region, and advice to benefit City Council, Regional District, City Administration, NEDC, and to submit nominations. It was never a financial oversight.
Thank you.
Motion to adjourn. So moved. Stand adjourned.